Chapter 2270. Half a year passed in the blink of an eye. In the mysterious mirror sky, the various forces all simultaneously fortified their own formations and tried their best to protect the fated people around them. This time, there were no powerhouses from the various sects who had made an agreement beforehand, so the person who obtained the Yuan Jade was likely to be coveted by the various sects, and it was also possible for it to be taken away. Although after the Yuan Jade entered the world, without the consent of the fated owner, no one could take it away, but as long as the fated owner was snatched, there were ways to make them submit. However, the most troublesome thing was not to protect this item, but to smoothly return. Because if you wanted to return, you would have to pass through the Yen sect realm gate. At this time, if the Yen sect did something, then this item might not be able to be kept. Therefore, those who were knowledgeable would have long found a place to stay in mysterious mirror sky and set up a formation. This way, once they obtained the Yuan Jade, they could immediately use it and not be afraid of it being taken away. However, this also had a great hidden danger. To refine it to the true Yang realm, it could be said to take a long time, and during this period, they would need to constantly swallow Ziqing great medicine to maintain their body in the world. If their seclusion place was attacked, then it was very likely that they would be forced to stop cultivating, and then they would miss the opportunity to ascend to the upper realm. In the cave, Kuai He and Zhuizhan sat there. Kuai He sensed for a while and thought that the Yuan Jade would appear soon, so he asked, "Taoist, when will you act?" Zhuizhan said, "No rush, now is not the time. If we act too early, once we are discovered, they will definitely find us here. Let's wait a little longer." Kuai He said in a low voice, "The formation flags here were bestowed by my master, and are enough to protect us. Taoist, you don't have to worry so much." Zhuizhan glanced at him and said, "Since Taoist has said so, what do I have to worry about? Otherwise, it would seem that I am afraid." He did not hesitate anymore and immediately took out a technique. However, after a while, the response that came made him startled. More than half of the methods that he secretly laid down were blocked and dissolved by others. Obviously, these people were not good people and had all sensed something. The reason why they did not act earlier was because they were afraid that he would use another method, so they simply ignored him and waited for him to act just now to break it. He also felt that it was a pity. He felt that he had underestimated his peers. However, it was better than nothing. However, he was too full of himself earlier, and this matter had undoubtedly caused him to lose face. Thus, he didn't reveal the truth and only coughed before saying as if nothing had happened, "The Tao technique has already been used, but the laws of fate are determined by the heavens. It might not fall into our hands, so fellow Taoists shouldn't have too much hope." In the Xian Mirror branch altar, Tang Yu stood on the altar with a solemn expression. Behind him were the guardians and deacons of the branch altar. Zhang Chan was also standing at the side. However, compared to everyone else, he seemed to be more relaxed. In the center of the altar, Luo Juan sat there. There was a black gas floating around his body that no one could see, drawing the Weili toward him and gathering them together. Although no one could feel this power, it was not difficult to see that his aura was constantly rising, and the altar was trembling slightly. Obviously, there was a huge external force that continued to pour in. After an unknown period of time, an inexplicable feeling suddenly appeared in everyone's hearts. It was as if there was a pull in the dark. Everyone couldn't help but look up into the sky, and they saw that in the sky above the altar, a profound stone that seemed to be able to penetrate the void and absorb light suddenly appeared from the void. Everyone stared blankly for a long time before someone reacted and said with joy, "Elder Tang, it's Yuan Yu, it's Yuan Yu." Tang Yu's expression did not show any surprise, but became particularly solemn. He took care of the deacons beside him and said, "Instruct all the deacons and guardians to guard the various restrictions. The more important it is at this time, the more important it is. Nothing can happen." After giving the instructions, he looked at the Yuan Yu. Although he had not made a decision on this item, he felt that it would most likely fall into Luo Juan's hands. Although he had prepared in advance, it was difficult to say what would happen. Moreover, he did not expect that the appearance of this item would cause such a big movement. It could be said that as long as one was in Xianjing heaven, he would be able to see such a scene at this moment. At this moment, a disciple beside him unfolded a map and saw that there were rays of clear light converging toward the Xianjing division. He immediately said in shock, "Elder Tang, the order, Luo order, and many other cultivators are rushing here." In Tang Yu's senses, he could already feel a dull and oppressive feeling. Even without the disciple's reminder, he knew that many people with tyrannical mana were already eyeing the Xianjing division. He made a prompt decision and ordered, "Instruct all the altars to turn the defensive formation." The Yuanyu hovered above for a long time, but did not fall. However, not long after, there was a rumbling sound coming from outside. It was obvious that someone was attacking the restrictions. Tang Yu was unmoved and only stared at the Yuanyu. As time passed, the tremors outside grew stronger. Even the people on the altars could see the qi activity of the restrictions fluctuating like flowing water. Many people could not help but feel uneasy. At this moment, there was finally movement from the Yuanyu. It slowly floated down, and under everyone's gaze, it first circled around Meng Hu, Gohan, and many other cultivators who cultivated the spirit of creation Dao technique. Finally, it flashed and landed steadily in front of Luo Juan. It was obvious that it had chosen its owner. At this moment, Luo Juan seemed to have sensed something. His eyelids moved slightly, and he suddenly woke up. His eyes revealed a strange light, and he stretched out his hand to take the Yuanyu. Not good. The people from the Yen order were shocked. Although they did not know how this person could break free from the sealing restrictions, they all had a feeling that if he succeeded, something bad would definitely happen. At this moment, the black shadow behind Luo Juan was madly swallowing the surrounding Weili, and it was becoming more and more solid. Just as he was about to grab the Yuanyu, a five-colored brilliance suddenly flashed in the air, and in an instant, the Yuanyu disappeared. Tang Yu could not help but be shocked. Just as he was about to go forward to investigate, he heard Zhang Chan's voice. "Don't worry, my friend. The Yuanyu has landed in a suitable place." Tang Yu's heart trembled. Anyone who could reach out and take away the Yuan Jade had to be an upper realm cultivator, and Zhang Chan was undoubtedly related to his sect's founder. In that case, it was obvious where this Yuan Jade had ended up. However, there was a more important matter to deal with at the moment. He said, "Everyone, don't panic. Everything is within the sect master's expectations. Open the realm gate immediately. There is no need to conceal it with the restrictions. We must let the people outside see it." There was also a realm gate in the branch altar, which could connect to the outside world and go straight back to the main altar. At this moment, he was not going to leave this place, but to tell the invaders that they could send the Fate Master away at any time. Even if they fought their way to the door, it would be useless. He also knew that this could not solve all the problems. There must be some people who would not give up, but it was enough as long as some people believed it. Things were as he expected. With the opening of the realm gate, the pressure on the outside suddenly decreased a lot. The various forces obviously knew that they had no chance. In order to avoid being counterattacked by the Yen order, they all returned to their original places through the realm gate. At this moment, in the main hall of the Yen order's main altar, after Gao Qingtu received the news, he immediately summoned a group of elders to discuss how to deal with the matter. Everyone believed that the Yanjiao sect would be attacked by various forces in the coming period of time. Because they had been in constant conflict with the various sects before, and now that the matter of the dimensional jade had come out, the conflict between them would definitely be triggered. Some elders suggested closing the realm gate and cutting off the various worlds. In this way, they would not be able to find trouble with the Yen order. However, some people thought that it was not feasible because there were countless branches of the Yen order, and it was impossible to abandon them all. Just as the elders were having different opinions, a disciple came to report that there was a decree from the founder on the spiritual tablet. Gao Qingtu did not dare to be negligent and went to the place where the spiritual tablet was located. When he read the decree, he found that this decree was different from the past. It did not say anything explicitly, but pointed out the location of a nameless heavenly domain that only the disciples of the Yen order could enter. At first, he did not understand. He thought that the founder had pointed out that this place could be a place for the Yen order to avoid the calamity. However, after thinking about it again, without his decree, outsiders would not be able to enter the main altar. It seemed unnecessary. After thinking deeply for a while, he nodded his head. In his heart, he somewhat understood. Even if the main altar of the Yen order could prevent outsiders from entering, it was still a place where the people of the world could see. However, if a person was sent to the nameless place and appeared to be carrying the dimensional jade, the various forces would definitely shrink back if they saw it. After all, the Yen order had obtained the dimensional jade. If a true Yang cultivator were to appear in the future, it would be very easy for him to find trouble with them. Thinking of this, his heart calmed down. However, he immediately felt that it was a pity that he could not really obtain the dimensional jade this time. However, he quickly let go of this thought. In his heart, he knew that although the method of the Yen order did not require external objects, the higher one went, the more difficult it would be. It was undoubtedly more difficult to break through to the next realm than ordinary people. Now, even if the Yen order obtained this thing, it was likely that no one could really use it to go to the upper realm. On the contrary, the Yen order had the signboard of the dimensional jade. It might be able to use this to deter the various sects and make them fear. In the Qing Huan Palace of Xianyuan Heaven, Zhang Yan sat cross-legged with his palm open. The dimensional jade was floating there. He had already decided who this thing should belong to. It should be left for the third-generation sect master of Qinsong, Yuan Zhongzi. Of the 4 great chaotic domains left behind by the great underworld patriarch, 3 had upper realm cultivators, but only the void chaotic domain had none. The dimensional jade left in Xianyuan Hong Heaven was likely to be left for that person, but in the end, it was obtained by him. Although the mysteries of heaven were ever-changing, and what the patriarch thought might not be true, regardless of this, Yuan Zhongzi's contribution to the Qinsong school was also enough to obtain this thing. He smiled slightly, waved his sleeve, and the thing disappeared. In the void chaotic domain, when the third-generation sect master Yuan Zhongzi was meditating, he suddenly felt something. He opened his eyes and looked, only to see a mysterious stone floating quietly in front of him. He could not sense it with his spiritual power. He thought for a moment and knew that it must have been sent by that person. After all, apart from that person, no one in Buxu Heaven would move this thing in front of him. His Taoist heart was firm, and his face was calm. There was no excitement or joy on his face, nor was there any pretentiousness. He stood up, bowed to Xian Yuan Tian, and then turned around, stretched out his hand, and with a wave of his sleeve, the dimensional jade was already in his palm. Chapter 2271. Gao Qingtu followed the instructions of the decree and opened the nameless world with great fanfare before sending an elder inside. Sure enough, as he expected, the various forces were originally restless, but after seeing this scene, they all retreated after searching for a long time without any results. After all, Yan Jiao had obtained the origin jade, and now there was someone who could help him preserve his cultivation. Regardless of whether the matter was successful or not, at least before the results were out, no one dared to offend him to death. After this incident, not only did the Yen sect resolve a crisis, but their relationship with the other sects also eased up a little. This was not because the original conflict no longer existed, but because the Yen sect might produce a true Yang Almighty in the future. This kind of deterrence was not small. Unless it was absolutely necessary, there was no need to turn hostile. Since the matters of the mystic mirror heaven were settled, all the sects returned to their respective places. Meng Hu also returned to Kunshin's subaltar. When altar master He Xianren heard that Meng Hu was about to return, he was very happy. After Meng Hu left, the main altar appointed another elder to serve as the great protector. However, this elder's status was rather high, and he would naturally not relinquish his power like Meng Hu did. Although the two of them did not have any conflicts when they worked together, He Xianren always felt that he was being held back at every turn. He was not as compatible with Meng Hu as he was with him. At this time, the main altar also fulfilled its previous promise and sent the elder away, restoring Meng Hu's previous status as the great protector of the Kun beginning branch altar. Meng Hu himself did not care much about it. If there was a problem, he could deal with it, and if there wasn't, he could just muddle along. On the second day after He Xianren received the news, Meng Hu returned to the branch altar. Although He Xianren was curious as to why Meng Hu had returned a few days earlier than he had promised, it was still a good thing after all. Hence, He Xianren came to look for Meng Hu. After exchanging some pleasantries, He Xianren went straight to the point. Protector Meng, you came back at the right time. I have a favor to ask of you. Recently, I have tried every means possible to mend the relationship with many sects, especially many of the disciples of the sects who believe in the Tao of the spirit of creation. Simply cutting off their memories would easily ruin their future path. I heard that Protector Meng is especially good at resolving this method, so I came looking for you. However, I need to trouble Protector Meng here. Guardian Meng said righteously, we serve the sect with our lives, it's not hard at all. Altar Lord He, don't underestimate me. He Xianren was overjoyed. He cupped his hands in greeting and said, then I'll leave everything to Protector Meng. In his heart, however, he was overjoyed and said, Guardian Meng has always been reliable. After this matter, my Kuan beginning branch will definitely be able to rope in these sections. In this way, we won't be in a difficult position in the future. After Zhang Yan obtained the vital energy of the Necropolis Lotus, he'd been constantly using it to pry into the Tao art behind it, and under his diligent cultivation, his strength Tao art had improved slightly. He raised his head and looked at the crack in the void. The Weili was surging and the robbery power was not as strong as before. Hence, it wouldn't be long before another great expert would descend. He had already seen it previously. This time, when he returned, the heavenly secrets would fall on the side of the great benefactors. After all, it was difficult for the spirit of creation to come again because of the previous venting. However, it was precisely because of this that the tribulation energy would become even weaker as the void crack grew larger, and the spirit of creation's main body might break through the barrier and follow closely behind him. So, he had to make the best use of this opportunity to make some preparations. From his point of view, although the great benefactors in the void were standing on the same side as him, he had never forgotten that the spirit of creation might exist. Because he couldn't identify it, he couldn't trust the great benefactors. In the end, he could only rely on himself. When another fellow Taoist returned, he must find a way to obtain the Qi-Ji of creation from Pauline so that he could perfect the Tao of strength. Although he didn't want to seize the spirit of creation from Pauline, he only wanted to borrow a bit of Qi-Ji. On the surface, it seemed easy, but no one knew what the other Taoists would think. Hence, if necessary, he might have to use forceful methods. As he was thinking, he suddenly had a feeling in his heart and noticed something. He turned his gaze towards Cheong Shao Tian. Inside the temple, Dan Yi was sitting in the clouds. Everything around him was the reflection of his mind. At this moment, he was unusually calm, which was enough to show that his state of mind was very stable. After a long period of training and deduction in the divine decree, he had decided to take that step and go to the upper realm to find the Dharma. When Zhang Yan first went to the God refinement realm, there was no one to guide him. He relied on himself to find the remnant of the Dharma left by the predecessors and his own deduction. In the end, he overcame all difficulties and found his way to the upper realm. But Dan Yi didn't need to do that. He had seen Zhang Yan's doppelganger in the real world many times. Even if it was just a doppelganger, it was also formed by the Tao of the upper realm. The fact that Zhang Yan could let him see it was actually showing a part of the mysteries of the upper realm to him. Other than that, he also had an advantage that no one else had. He was the body of the spirit of creation. In terms of level, he was already above the true yang. Therefore, to others, this path was to break the shackles, climb the upper realm, and jump out of the world. But to him, it was just going back to the origin. If he was willing to follow the Tao, he could easily pass this stage. But this was also the difficulty. He couldn't abandon his own control. Instead, he had to fight against the bewitchment here and try his best not to lean towards the other side. After feeling that there was nothing else he needed, he spread out his mana. After all, he was the spirit of creation. Back then, Daoist 1K spent a lot of effort to steal Bu Su Tian's Weili to push himself forward. But when his consciousness arrived, he naturally borrowed the power to help him advance to the upper realm. At this moment, Dan Yi felt that he was surrounded by a force. This force was everywhere and unusually fierce. It was as if he was immersed in a boundless ocean. Only the ground under his feet could stand. It was as if he would be drowned if he was not careful. He had a feeling that he couldn't fall into it. Otherwise, he would definitely lose himself. Therefore, he used all his strength to protect himself. At this moment, a spiritual light suddenly appeared in front of him. It was faintly discernible and difficult to see clearly. For some reason, he understood that this was his own heart light. This was originally hidden beneath the boundless ocean of mighty power, but because of his perseverance, it had emerged. Even though it was still very weak and not worth mentioning compared to the ocean of mighty power, as long as this light didn't go out, he would be able to follow it to the other shore. After an unknown period of time, under his persistence, the murky Weili tide gradually became clear. His surroundings were also bright. He looked at the power of the same origin around him. He knew that he could choose to swallow these Weili and turn them into his own. Maybe then he could climb to the highest level that he could reach. But if he gave them up, then he would have to rely on himself to slowly cultivate in the future. To be able to avoid countless difficulties and directly enter the upper realm, and it didn't seem like there was much risk involved, this was undoubtedly an extremely great temptation to cultivators. But he didn't act rashly. He believed that only what he cultivated was his own. If he gave it to someone else, there would be hidden dangers. The rise of this thought meant that he had made a decision. The Weili tide outside disappeared. Not only that, everything, including everything in the world, retreated together. He floated out from within. At the same time, he felt a sense of ease rising from his body. Before this, he never thought that he would have such heavy shackles on him. Now that he was free, he felt refreshed. But when he floated to a certain point, he suddenly trembled. The scene before his eyes suddenly changed. He found himself in an unfamiliar place. There were a few Taoists standing there. They seemed to be arguing about something. He wanted to hear what they were talking about, but everything was blurry. He seemed to understand what they wanted to do, but he couldn't probe further. He could only watch these people and himself like a bystander. At this moment, his consciousness gradually became clear. In an instant, he understood endless mysteries. If he continued like this, he would be able to find the ultimate great Tao. However, he knew that this wasn't right because it wasn't something he deserved as well. So, he utilized his supreme willpower to stop this thought of his. In just an instant, the scene before his eyes had vanished, and it was replaced by countless dazzling starlight that appeared in the world. But he felt that he was gradually getting further away from these worlds. He suddenly understood that only by finding the way back could he return to this place. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to show himself again. With this thought, he made up his mind and followed the faint feeling in his heart. Although Zhang Yan sat in the Qinghuan Palace, he had always been paying attention to Dan Yi. If he could guard his heart, there wouldn't be a problem for him to pass. But if he couldn't do this, he would no longer be Dan Yi. He would definitely destroy him and send his soul back to be reincarnated. But he didn't expect that he would gain something else from this observation. Because Dan Yi was seeking to break through in Bu Su Tian, and as the master of Bu Su Tian and the master of a part of the great Tao, he was able to clearly see Dan Yi's process of seeking the Tao. At the same time, he confirmed a guess in his heart. The reason why the spirit of creation, Weili, wanted to start from the bottom and push the reincarnated body into the spirit refinement realm was actually because of this. Once the reincarnated body of the spirit of creation stepped into the spirit refinement realm, they would see the scene before the essence of creation shattered. That was a chance to completely accept the original body of the spirit of creation and comprehend the Tao. And what the spirit refinement realm saw was the truth. In other words, if the reincarnated body was a person who obeyed the Tao, then it was very likely that the reincarnated body would instantly obtain the Tao that the spirit of creation possessed when it was at its peak. Possessing the Tao meant possessing the ability. This was equivalent to the complete reincarnation of the spirit of creation. Although it was only a fragment of the spirit of creation and was far inferior to the original body, even if it appeared in the spirit refinement realm for a moment, it was still terrifying enough. The original body of the spirit of creation could rely on itself to fight against all the great virtue. With the current strength of the spirit refinement realm, it was obviously unable to resist. What was even more terrifying was that even if one could escape, the original body would most likely be able to break through the robbery power and return. Then, everything would be irreversible. Zhang Yan's eyes were deep and serene. It seemed that they were here to think of a way to deal with the spirit of creation. Even if the spirit of creation didn't really land on the original body, it was still thinking of ways to swallow them. He pondered for a moment. All the reincarnated bodies of the spirit of creation, as long as they submitted to the Tao, were undoubtedly a potential threat. Since that was the case, then he must find a way to cut off the path of this generation's advancement. Chapter 2272. Zhang Yan understood very well that if it wasn't for the jade of Zhou Huan blocking the way, it would have been almost impossible to stop the reincarnated bodies of the spirits of creation from ascending to the upper realm. At this moment, he was also thinking about a problem. Was Yuan Jade so difficult to appear because it was like creation? Was it born like this, or was there a powerful being who had sensed the change in the situation with the spirits of creation and made such arrangements in advance? However, in order to achieve this, he would have to change the rules and regulations. However, the great virtue and the spirits of creation each had their own great paths. Logically speaking, at least one needed to be proficient in all great paths and suppress both. Just now was the only thing that could be done. The only thing that could be done was the spirits of creation itself, because whether it was the land of creation, the spirits of creation, or the Yuan Jade, they were all born from it. However, the spirits of creation were only given spirituality later, so unless someone borrowed its power, it would not take the initiative to do this. This question could not be answered now, but he believed that even with the Yuan Jade as a barrier, they could not relax because Bu Su Tian and the Mirror Lake could produce the Yuan Jade. It must be known that there were many places of creation that had not appeared in front of them. Not only did they contain Yuan Jade, but there were also fragments of the spirits of creation. Especially now that the spirits of creation Weili were scattered among them, it could be said that all three were present. Who knew when a fated person would appear? It was fine that they did not guard against this in the past, but now that they had sensed it, it meant that this was very likely to happen, and they had to pay attention to it. After thinking for a moment, he moved his mind and created a doppelganger. In an instant, it appeared in the world created by Fengdu and the others. Fengdu and the other four hurriedly appeared to welcome him. Xiang Zhu said, "Fellow Taoist Xianyuan, do you have something to tell us?" Zhang Yan said, "There is something I need to discuss with you." He told them what he saw, but Fengdu did not respond. Xiang Zhu and the others were shocked. They did not expect the spirits of creation Weili to have such a trick. Xiang Zhu discussed with the others and said, "Thank you for telling us. It is difficult for us to take care of those unknown places. We will not allow the spirits of creation to gain power in our domain." At this moment, Dan Yi was returning to the modern world, but he felt that Weili were pressing down on him from all directions. If he did not find a way to resist, he would be cut off from the modern world. Not only that, there was another force that continued to tempt him, telling him that he would be able to ascend to the heavens in a single step if he went there, but he ignored it. At this point, he knew what he had to do. As long as he didn't panic, the creation spirit Weili wouldn't affect him much. As long as he guarded his heart, he wouldn't deviate from the right path. Following that feeling, he easily found his way back to Bushutian. Although he had experienced a lot when he broke through the barrier, to the present world, it was just an instant. But at this moment, when he looked up, he was no longer limited to Bushutian. Instead, he looked into the void and observed the world. He sighed with emotion and said, "Put away the universe in your sleeves, live up to the world. After chanting, he stood silently for a moment and then set off for Xianyuan heaven. Although he had cultivated a superior technique, he had many doubts in his heart. Perhaps only Zhang Yan could answer them. This time, Zhang Yan looked thoughtfully at Dan Yi's experience of achieving the Tao. After all, the spirit of creation was born into the world, so his achievements were different from his. He had created the world himself, but the spirit of creation had gone far away and returned to the world. It was similar to the great virtue-seeking Tao. But considering that the level of his foundation was beyond that of ordinary cultivators, there was nothing strange about it. Seeing that the spirit of creation was coming to Qinghuan Palace, he smiled and said to the spirit of creation, "When fellow Dan Yi arrives, there is no need to report, just invite him directly into the hall." Not long after, he saw Dan Yi enter the hall. This time, he didn't reveal his incarnation like before. Instead, he welcomed Dan Yi with his real body. He nodded and said, "Congratulations, fellow Taoist, on reaching the upper realm." Dan Yi looked up and saw Zhang Yan standing there with qi surging under his body and 5 lights shining behind him. Although he looked more real than before, he still gave Dan Yi an unfathomable feeling. Knowing that there was still a gap between them, Dan Yi stepped forward and cupped his hands, saying, "Thank you for pointing out the right path, fellow Taoist, so I did not delay the results of my cultivation." Zhang Yan said, "Fellow Taoist Dan Yi, there is no need to be so polite. This is your own fate. If you could not guard your heart and not be influenced by external evils, you would not have been able to pass through this gate safely." Dan Yi said solemnly, "Fellow Taoist is the master of Busu Tian, so you can rely on yourself to cultivate, but Busu Tian blocked all forces. This is all fellow Taoist's ability, how can I not understand?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Since fellow Taoist has reached the upper realm, I should meet with all of you." As the sound of his voice faded, the silhouettes of Taoists appeared in the hall one after another. Each of them had a solemn demeanor and were surrounded by Tao Qi. All of them bowed to Dan Yi and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoist." Dan Yi knew at a glance that these were all Taoists who had reached the spirit refinement realm. Just now, when he found Busu Tian, he could faintly feel the Weili among these people. He immediately bowed and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoists." These people only appeared to greet this newly accomplished Taoist, and after that, they disappeared one by one. Dan Yi looked at Zhang Yan and bowed solemnly. He said, "Fellow Taoist, I have many questions to ask." Zhang Yan smiled and gestured with his hand. He said, "Fellow Taoist, please take a seat. You can take your time to ask." On the other side, Fu Qingming, Michihito Ichido, and Taoist Wan Kei were cultivating when they suddenly sensed that Dan Yi had disappeared from their perception. They clearly had an impression of him, but it was as if this person had never existed in this world, and they couldn't make any calculations. But after a moment, the impression of this person became clear again, as if he had returned to the world, but just like Zhang Yan, he became elusive and unpredictable. Dan Yi had already informed the 3 of them before he started cultivating, so they couldn't help but realize that this person had most likely reached the upper realm and achieved the true Tao. The 3 of them sighed. Their fellow Taoist who cultivated with them in the past had transcended the world, and they, due to various reasons, had no hope of reaching the upper realm. Michihito Ichido knew that his foundation wasn't strong enough, so he had long given up on it. Fu Qingming and Taoist Wan Kei, on the other hand, had come back to life, and it was all thanks to Zhang Yan's Weili molding, so it was impossible for them to reach the upper realm. Fu Qingming said, "The memorial tablets in this world should be rearranged." Michihito Ichido didn't care about this. If he wanted to, the will of the world could be usurped and changed by them. If it wasn't to restrict the demons and other races, he wouldn't care about these small details. He said, "That's how it should be." Taoist Wan Kei didn't say a word. He had come back to life and had no hope of reaching the upper realm, but he was eternally present, so he didn't care about these things. On the other side, Bai Wei, Deng Zhang, and the 6 demon masters also noticed the change in Dan Yi's aura. After he disappeared, he shone again, but it was vast and immeasurable. It was obvious that he had ascended to another level. The few of them immediately felt a great threat, so they gathered their divine wills together to find a countermeasure. Qi Yao said with a serious expression, "This person has gone to the upper realm." Heng Jing panicked and said, "We have always been enemies with the human path. If this person is against us, what should we do?" Deng Zhang said in a deep voice, "It doesn't have to be like this. Why would someone who has transcended look back at the mortal world? If this person is against us, then we won't be able to sit here anymore." Bai Wei sighed and said, "If that's the case, then it's fine. What we need to worry about now is if someone among us has the fortune to see the door to the upper realm. If this person tries to stop us, then we will be suppressed forever." Deng Zhang also frowned. Those who cultivated the emotionless Tao only sought the great Tao. However, if the door to the great Tao was blocked by someone, it was something he couldn't tolerate. However, he couldn't do anything about it now. Qi Yao was also gloomy. The human path was already one step ahead and had the upper hand. If Danny tried to stop them, then they could only be suppressed by the human path forever and never be able to rise again. After the four of them discussed for a while, they couldn't come up with a solution. In the end, they could only decide that as long as the human path didn't provoke them, they wouldn't make a move. After the demon masters, Bai Wei, and Deng Zhang separated, Ling Qiu saw everyone's gloomy expression and smiled. "Is everyone worried about the upper realm? I thought there was no need to worry about it." Qi Yao looked at him and said, "Fellow Taoist, just now, you aren't saying a word. Could it be that you have a solution to this predicament?" Ling Qiu smiled. "I can't, but someone else can." Qi Yao's eyes flickered as if he had thought of something. Ling Qiu looked at everyone present and said, "Everyone, we aren't like Bai Wei and Deng Zhang. Even if we can't find someone in the upper realm to help us, we have our own people to rely on." At this point, his tone became heavier. "Back then, Demon Lord Qizhou mysteriously disappeared and hasn't returned for a long time. In my opinion, it's very likely that he's gone to the upper realm as well." Heng Jing asked doubtfully, "But how do you know that Demon Lord Qizhou hasn't passed the barrier?" No one knew what the path to the upper realm was like. However, from what they knew, Dan Yi seemed to be able to return after transcending, but Demon Lord Qizhou had disappeared without a trace. This was really hard to believe. However, Ling Qiu smiled and said, "Everyone, why do you think that just now, that person who's achieved the upper realm doesn't come to deal with us? Perhaps it's not because he's disdainful, but because of Demon Lord Qizhou." Everyone's expressions changed. Qi Yao pondered for a moment and said, "It's not like there's no way to confirm it. Why don't we set up an altar and see if Demon Lord Qizhou has any response?" The other demon masters thought about it and felt that this was a good idea. In the past, Demon Lord Qizhou had no relationship with them, and they couldn't see through him. Therefore, even if he disappeared, they didn't look into the reason. Now, however, they hoped that he had really gone to another realm as they thought. That way, they would still have some hope and not be suppressed by the human path forever. More importantly, if this was true, they might be able to use this opportunity to learn about the wonders of the upper realm. Chapter 2273. After Ling Jun and the others decided on this matter, they were afraid that the situation would change if they delayed any longer, so they immediately separated to prepare the sacrificial altar. In fact, everyone still had doubts in their hearts, but under the threat of an upper realm almighty, they knew that they were powerless to struggle at all. Their life and death were in the hands of someone else at any time. This made them feel great fear, and Demon Lord Qizhou seemed to be their only hope. Speaking of all the demon masters in the past, even Qi Yao and the others did not have a good relationship with Demon Lord Qizhou. This was because no one knew what he was thinking. Not only that, when the demon masters faced him, they always felt an inexplicable pressure, so they always avoided him. Even when he disappeared, they did not feel that anything was wrong. Instead, they felt a little more relaxed. They did not expect that they would take the initiative to collude with him and ask for his help. After everything was ready, the 6 of them burned incense to pay their respects and silently recited his name in their hearts. However, this continued for a long time, but they did not receive any response. Ling Jun and Qi Yao did not say anything, but Heng Jing and the others hesitated. Was this demon Lord Qizhou really dead, or was he unwilling to respond after receiving their sacrificial offerings? After waiting for a long time, seeing that there was still no result, Heng Jing could not help but look at Ling Jun and said, "I'm afraid this matter is not as you think." Ling Jun said seriously, "I don't think so, but our attitude is not humble enough." He looked at the crowd and said, "Fellow Taoists, pay respects to him as an equal. Why would Demon Lord Qizhou pay attention to us? Since it is to pay our respects, we should pay our respects." Qi Yao and the others furrowed their brows. In the past, Qizhou had always treated them as equals, but now, they had to pay their respects to him without confirming the situation. They instinctively wanted to refuse such a request. If the result was not as they expected, wouldn't they lose face and become a joke? Ling Jun did not care about what they thought. He first prostrated himself in front of the sacrificial altar. Even Jian Tong and Ji Yu, who had always been close to him, were a little hesitant. Seeing this, Qi Yao pondered for a moment and said in a deep voice, "No matter what, Demon Lord Qizhou is the first demon lord in the world. We all use him as a reference when we stay in this world. There's no harm in paying our respects. Besides, we don't have much of a choice." Between losing face and the threat to their lives, the various demon masters naturally knew which was more important. Even if they were very unwilling, they could only hope for the slightest chance at this moment. So, they all knelt down. At this time, Ling Du suddenly felt as if a gaze from a very distant place fell on him, causing his spirit to tremble involuntarily. After he noticed these changes, he couldn't help but feel extremely excited. This undoubtedly showed that his deduction was correct, so he hurriedly bowed once more and said loudly, "Demonic ancestor Qizhou, we juniors are here to pray." Presently, there's a great figure of the mortal Tao that has attained an exalted technique, and we naturally think that if we have enmity towards him, then we're unable to go against him, so we've come to pray. At this moment, the various demon masters also noticed the abnormality, and their hearts trembled. At the same time, the scene in front of them changed, and they discovered that they had stopped on a huge continent. However, when they sensed it again, they couldn't help but be horrified. They were actually stopped on an incomparably huge finger. After Qi Yao recovered from his initial shock, he also knelt down again and said, "We greet demonic ancestor Qizhou." This kind of ability was definitely not something that the previous demon Lord Qizhou could do, so he immediately changed the way he addressed this person, and called him demonic ancestor like Ling Du did. At this moment, the various demon masters suddenly felt countless words and images surging into their minds. It was abnormally chaotic, and they couldn't distinguish them at all. All the demon masters knew that this was because the difference between their levels was too great. They saw too many things at once, but they couldn't understand them at the moment, which led to this situation. They wanted to transmit something, but at this moment, each of them felt a force pressing down on them, and they were incomparably insignificant before this force. Fortunately, this situation didn't last for too long. Just when they felt that they couldn't bear it anymore and were about to be crushed, the scene around them suddenly collapsed. In the blink of an eye, they found themselves back in front of the sacrificial altar. When Qi Yao and the others recovered from their bewilderment, they all revealed expressions of lingering fear. Heng Jing said in confusion, "Just now, that person, should be demonic ancestor Qizhou. But in the just now situation, what exactly does this person mean?" Ling Du smiled and said, "Everyone, I think there's no need to pay too much attention to this matter. Even if demonic ancestor Qizhou doesn't say anything, it's enough for him to accept us as tributes." Qi Yao said in a low voice, "That's true. This person doesn't need to promise us anything. He's already been generous enough to meet us. Moreover, it's not like we didn't gain anything just now." All the demon masters present nodded to themselves. Although none of them had reached the peak of the true yang level, they had now seen a true upper realm technique. Moreover, the other party was a demon master who had become an almighty. This would undoubtedly be of great help to their cultivation in the future. Ling Du suggested, we should build an altar and enshrine the demonic ancestors' memorial tablet on it. We should also inform our disciples to show our respect to the demonic ancestor. Qi nodded and said, that's right. All the demon masters also voiced their agreement. They understood that this wasn't just for worship. As long as the demonic ancestors' memorial tablet was here, they would still have the confidence to fight against the human path. Zhang Yan was currently conversing with Dan Yi in Qinghuan Palace. He didn't pay much attention to the unusual movements of the demon masters in the world. However, he, Wei Li, responded spontaneously and obediently to his wishes. When he sensed the changes in the real world, he cast a glance over and then retracted his gaze. These demon masters and foreign species were still useful for now. Not mentioning the matter of stirring up karma, if the human path didn't have external threats, then there would definitely be internal strife. Therefore, keeping them was more useful than getting rid of them. Dan Yi was currently sitting on the guest seat. He had previously asked Zhang Yan many questions about spirit refinement cultivators. However, what puzzled him the most was the last scene he saw. Therefore, he asked about it again. Zhang Yan pondered for a while and said, what fellow Taoists saw should be the scene where the Vedantas bestowed the spirit of creation with the spirit of creation in order to pursue the great Tao. He told him about the cause and effect of this. Following this matter, he roughly explained the current situation within the void of all beings. After listening, Dan Yi said in a daze, so there are so many reasons. He was also a little worried. I can still feel the Wei Li that is everywhere. It must be from the true body of the spirit of creation that fellow Taoist mentioned. I can still maintain myself now, but if it really comes, I don't know if I can protect myself. Zhang Yan smiled and said, although fellow Taoist is the spirit of creation that was born into the world, you have achieved success based on your own Tao. It has already formed its own pattern. As long as your original heart is not biased, then you can no longer be restrained. Just like those Wei Li that were chased away, the true body of the spirit of creation lost that part forever. After Dan Yi achieved success, he could also strip a part of the power from the true body. Therefore, the higher the cultivation of the person, the more Wei Li that could be snatched away. This was also one of the reasons why Zhang Yan was willing to let him enter the spirit refinement state. If Dan Yi could achieve Vedantas, then the weakening of the spirit of creation would be no less than destroying another Wei Li incarnation. Now, after discussing with Fengdu and the others, they felt that it was better to let it go. All the bodies of the spirit of creation that were born into the world, as long as they succumbed to the Tao, then they must find a way to cut off their future path and force them to cultivate their own Tao instead of letting them be used by the true body of the spirit of creation. As for those spirit of creation that were immersed in the unknown world, due to the collision and blending of the Wei Li between the spirit refinement state and the void, as long as they stepped into the spirit refinement state, there would definitely be signs. Then, no matter who was the first to notice it, they must find a way to beat it back, or at least find a way to separate it from the world, and definitely not let it fall into the spirit of creation. After Dan Yi asked for advice, many of his doubts were solved. After thanking Zhang Yan, he left the hall and went to observe the spirit of creation. After he left, Zhang Yan took a look at the crack in the void, and his eyes flickered. The Wei Li of the spirit of creation was temporarily suppressed, and the spirit of creation's changes calmed down. However, this kind of situation would not last for too long, and the changes would be in the near future. However, the true body of the spirit of creation was too strong. If the Vedantas who returned were not complete Wei Li, then it would not fundamentally change the balance of power between the two sides. Therefore, he did not expect the person who returned to be outstanding. As long as he could smoothly obtain Pauline's qi activity from the other party, it would be fine. He retracted his gaze and sat in meditation. After an unknown period of time, he felt a strange movement outside. He looked up and saw that there was a force behind the robbery power that was about to break through. At the same time, the spirit of creation was also affected by the Wei Li. He had seen such a scene many times, but he noticed that this time, there were a few Wei Li that fell, and they did not fall at the same time, but one after another. However, the robbery power suffered a series of breakthroughs in a short period of time, and the spirit of creation might follow because of this, so he had to delay it here. Therefore, he immediately sent a message to Hongdu and the others, asking them to sacrifice the whaley with him. They could let 1 or 2 people return first, and as for those who did not fall into the spirit of creation, they could first stop them. At this moment, there was a flash of spiritual light in the void, and 2 Taoists walked out of the void. The 2 of them felt that the spirit of creation had been affected by the whaley, so they summoned Pauline, who had fallen into the void, and sent the power into her. Xiang Ju and the others felt that it was both familiar and strange. They knew that it was because of the incomplete memories, so they went forward to greet the 2 and asked, "May I know how to address the 2 of you?" The Taoist standing on the right laughed, cupped his fist, and said in a loud voice, "From the beginning to the end, there is no form, and the light of wisdom can determine the name. I am the name of the elephant, greeting the fellow Taoists." The Taoist on the left had a cold expression, cupped his fist, and said, "Silence is not emptiness, the emptiness is one, the emptiness comes to obtain the Tao, I am the Taoist naming Kong." Speaking up to this point, he looked at Xiang Ju and the others, and said with a slightly displeased tone, "But I have a question, besides us, there are other Taoists who will also return, why do you want to stop us?" Chapter 2274. Xiang Ju glanced at Hong Do and saw that Hong Do was disdainful and had no intention of explaining himself. Xiang Ju had no choice but to step forward and say, "Fellow Taoists, the void silence has been mostly broken after we returned, and the resistance of the tribulation power has been greatly weakened. It will not be a good thing if the creation spirit returns in its true form." As In Kong and Xiang Ming returned, their mighty force collided with everyone else. They gradually gained some understanding of the situation in the void silence. In Kong shook his head and said, "It is precisely because of this that we have to let those 2 fellow Taoists return successfully. Otherwise, they might not be able to compete for the spirit of creation next time. If those 2 are unable to return successfully, it will instead weaken our strength here." Xiang Ju smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist, your words are somewhat reasonable, but forgive us for not following your words." In Kong stared at him and said, "What is the reason?" He could tell that In Kong did not simply disagree with his opinion, but there were other reasons. Xiang Ju said, "The creation spirit can steal our Daos, and we have long suspected that it has stolen our Daos and borrowed our Daos to enter the world." He looked at the 2 and said, "Before we understand the situation, please forgive us for not trusting the 2 of you." In Kong said with a serious expression, "We have nothing to do with the creation spirit, and our Daos were not stolen by it." Xiang Ju shook his head and said, "This is not something that can be proven with words. Even we can't clear our suspicions now, and the 2 of you are no exception." "Oh," Xiang Ming said with a laugh, "doesn't it mean that everyone can be borrowed by the spirit of creation? Then how can we trust each other?" Xiang Ju said, "Not all of you are like that, but at least one of you is trustworthy. That's because this one is a creation spirit that attained Tao after it was shattered. The creation spirit's original body was already trapped in the power of robbery, so it's not possible that he's just borrowing it." In Kong frowned and shook his head, "Although this Taoist Xianyuan achieved Tao after the creation spirit was broken, it does not prove that he is not a suspect." Xiang Ju smiled. "If the 2 of you have any questions, feel free to discuss it with fellow Taoist Xianyuan. At the very least, before fellow Taoist Xianyuan agrees, we will not withdraw our powers." At this moment, Wei Ming said, "Fellow Taoists, in the past, for the sake of seeking for the missing great Tao, the creation of a spirit was able to appear. Now that the Tao technique has appeared, why don't the 2 of you search for the Tao technique first? After you're able to improve, it won't be too late to ask the rest of the Taoists to return." In Kong and Xiang Ming looked at each other. They could tell that Taoist Xianyuan was the leader, at least on the surface. In Kong pondered for a moment and said, "I would like to meet Brother Xianyuan, I wonder if you can introduce me to him." Xiang Ju pointed and smiled. "Fellow Taoist Xianyuan lives in that Bushu heaven. You 2 can go and meet him." The 2 of them looked in the direction he pointed, and their eyes narrowed. Although there were countless worlds within the desolation, only that place was the brightest, and it was the place where they could sense the greatest amount of creation essence. With a thought, the two of them arrived in front of Bushutian and said, "Is fellow Xianyuan here? The two of us have something to ask, can you show yourself?" The two of them waited for a moment, and then they saw a young Taoist walking out from Bushutian. His body was covered with a black robe, and Xian Qi was surging under his feet. Behind him, there were 5 faint lights. The two of them sensed that this person's aura was unfathomable, and their hearts shuddered. When they came, they already knew that this person was not simple, since he had such prestige among his peers. But when they actually met, they still felt that they had underestimated him. The two of them hurriedly bowed and said, "Greetings, Brother Xianyuan." Zhang Yan also bowed and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoists." He smiled and said, "I know why the two of you are looking for me. Since both of you have different opinions, why don't we have a duel to prove our Tao techniques?" The reason he proposed this was not a simple contest of mana. Among the Vedanta, the Wali had a higher understanding of Tao techniques than others, and they could see more secrets of creation, so their words were naturally more reasonable. Yingkong and Xiangming discussed it in their divine will, and they agreed with this idea. Compared to persuading the other party with words, this method was undoubtedly more direct and effective, and it could also avoid more disputes. Yingkong took a step forward and said politely, "Then let I experience fellow Taoists' brilliance first." Zhang Yan smiled and shook his head, saying, "Both of you can fight together." Hearing his words, Yingkong and Xiangming did not refuse, and they agreed to it. They could see that this person was not simple, and most importantly, he had Busu Tian behind him, so the power he could use was not small. It was not likely that one of them could win, so they were just being polite just now. Moreover, the two of them were not without selfish motives. It was not difficult for them to see that Zhang Yan had the highest status among the fellow Taoists that had returned, and everyone was convinced by him. If they could win against Zhang Yan, they could prove their strength, and at the same time, it would not be difficult for them to make their fellow Taoists lower their heads, and they could take the lead. On the other side, Xiang Ju and the others also saw that the two of them were about to fight against Zhang Yan, and they could not help but pay attention to the battle. Hong Du sneered and said, "You overestimate yourselves." Xiang Ju said to the others, "Without looking at their techniques and just looking at the Wali's aura, these two are actually a level stronger than us." Although the others did not say anything, they all admitted this point. There were also differences between great virtues. Generally speaking, the more powerful a great virtue was, the later they would return. However, there were also exceptions. For example, Wei Ming had already made preparations to return. As for Feng Du, although he was much stronger than them, he had been consciously lured over by a few people. It could be roughly assumed that the people who returned later were slightly stronger. However, the great virtue battle didn't just look at mighty strength, it also looked at the usage of one's Tao. Unless one had reached the level of Feng Du, even without the lotus of good fortune, one would still be able to deal with them. However, Yingkong and Xiangming were clearly not at that level. While the few of them were conversing, Xiangming had already made the first move. He circulated his mana, and boundless starlight spread out behind him. The brilliance of the world around him fell into it, and it turned into threads of light. This thread did not care about speed or quantity. It was the manifestation of a Tao. If one could not break it, then when one was bound by it, he would be able to see one's true name. The so-called original name wasn't a taboo name, but the mark of existence in everything. If he were to find the source of it, then his opponent wouldn't be able to keep any secrets from him, and even the Tao arts he possessed would be completely useless against him. Xiang Ju and the others looked slightly serious. They could all see that it was not easy to resist such a Tao. Moreover, as long as Xiangming won once, he could win again and again, so that one would never be able to win against him. At this moment, Yingkong also shook his sleeve, and a ball of mana spread out. Although he did not participate in the battle, the qi was vast and deep. Just by appearing, it felt like everything in the world was falling into it. At this moment, apart from Feng Du, Xiang Ju, and the others were all surprised. It was not difficult for them to tell that the qi was extremely mysterious. Any external force that fell on it would be blocked by it. As long as the Tao was not broken, it would be able to withstand the pressure no matter how much force came. The Tao that the two of them practiced was extraordinary. One was attacking, and the other was defending. When the two of them worked together, it was like the embrace of yin and yang. It was almost perfect. At this moment, Xiang Ju and the others had to admit that if they went up to fight with the two of them, they might not necessarily lose. However, with their current methods, they would not be able to do anything to them. Heng Wu sighed. So the two of them have such confidence. No wonder they were unwilling to give in to fellow Xian Yuan. Zhang Yan looked at Ying Kong and Xiang Ming's methods, and his eyes flickered. In reality, no matter how profound their Tao was, he could definitely break it in a Weili way. He only needed to punch them with his strength body. However, even though this could intimidate the two of them, the method was too violent. It might not be able to convince the two of them. Therefore, he did not use such a method. Instead, he directly fought with them using Tao. With a thought, 2 rays of sword light flew up and slashed at the two of them. Ying Kong raised his magical energy and was about to retract the sword light that was slashing towards him. However, his expression suddenly changed. The sword light actually tore apart his magical energy and slashed towards him. Xiang Ming had originally left the defense to Ying Kong, but he did not expect that he would not be able to block the sword light. He instantly determined that it was useless to give up on attacking and defending. Instead, he fell into a passive position. The only way to win was to urge his offense. However, the result was beyond his expectations. When the light landed on Zhang Yan's body, it actually passed through him without touching him at all. At the same time, the sword light had already slashed into the two of them. The two of them could not help but take a step back. However, the sword light did not contain any killing intent, so the two of them did not lose any Tao. The two of them were silent for a moment. They knew that they had lost the battle and that their opponent had shown mercy. However, the problem was that they did not even know how they lost. It was obvious that their opponent's ability had far exceeded their understanding. Xiang Ming cupped his hands and said with admiration, "Fellow's Tao is profound and far above ours. We naturally know when to advance and when to retreat. From now on, we are willing to follow your wishes." Ying Kong said, "I hope that I will have the opportunity to ask for your help in the future." Previously, they had doubts about Zhang Yan's identity. However, since Zhang Yan had defeated them in this battle, most of their suspicions could be dispelled. The reason was very simple. If the other party was a creation spirit, then with his strength, there was no need for him to talk nonsense with them. He could just directly use his strength to suppress them. Zhang Yan smiled and did not say anything. At this moment, Xiang Ming thought for a moment and said, "Fellow, just now, do you think that there might be a creation spirit among the people who returned?" Zhang Yan said, "Fellow, if you have anything to say, feel free to say it." Xiang Ming's divine will said, "If it really is a creation spirit, I might be able to help you identify it." Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows and said, "Oh? Then what do you plan to do?" Xiang Ming said, "The method of borrowing the creation spirit looks flawless on the surface. However, everything has a name. Even if it looks the same on the surface, it is still fundamentally different. If I can see its name, I might be able to find it." Chapter 2275. Zhang Yan thought about it. If he could really find the person who borrowed the spirit of creation, it would indeed solve the big problem in front of him. However, he couldn't do that. The art of elephant names could be said to touch upon everyone's foundation. Anyone who was seen by the art of elephant names would have no chance of defeating the art of elephant names. Zhu Dade couldn't easily reveal his true name. Even if he could suppress everyone, he wouldn't do so. This was because facing the spirit of good fortune wasn't something he could handle alone. He wouldn't be the first to panic. Moreover, Xiang Ming seemed to be giving advice, but his thoughts were actually not so pure. It was very likely that he wanted to take advantage of the spirit of creation to obtain his own benefits. The most important thing here was not this, but that he couldn't completely trust Xiangming. If he was borrowing the body of the spirit of creation, it would instead expose everyone's foundation to him. Therefore, he directly refused, "This matter is inappropriate, don't mention it again." Xiangming could naturally understand what Zhang Yan meant. He still had a smile on his face, not at all annoyed that he was rejected. He cupped his hands and said, "I was rash." Xiangming had been paying attention to the conversation between Zhang Yan and the two of them. However, when Xiangming suddenly used his divine will to transmit a message, he inexplicably thought of something and couldn't help but change his expression slightly. Wei Ming and the others undoubtedly thought of something, and their hearts sank. Fortunately, they soon heard Zhang Yan say that it was inappropriate, and only then did they relax. After a few words with Kong and Xiangming, Zhang Yan said, "Can I have a look at the creation Pauline in your hands?" Kong and Xiangming were a little confused, but they didn't hesitate. Other than the owner, no one else could take away the creation Pauline. They were thinking about the purpose of Zhang Yan's action, but they had already given the Pauline in their hands. Zhang Yan allowed Pauline to come in front of him. He took a stream of qi from each of them, then he waved his sleeve and returned the item. He said, "I'll need you two to work together with fellow cultivators to make sure those two don't return too early." He didn't explain why he took Pauline's qi. After Kong and Xiangming took Pauline back, they didn't ask any questions. They cupped their hands and said, "As you wish." With that, the two of them left. Zhang Yan looked at the crack in the void. Just now, Kong said that if the two great virtues were to be obstructed from returning, they might be devoured by the spirit of creation instead. Although there was a possibility, it wasn't very high. Because how wily were the two great virtues? Even if the true body of the spirit of creation wanted to collect them, there would be no movement at all, and the great virtues would definitely resist. If that was the case, he would try to open up a path so that the two could sink into Zhuyu. Moreover, the act of devouring the great virtues would require refining Taoist techniques. This wasn't a simple act, and it would definitely delay the return of the spirit of creation. If he was the spirit of creation, he would definitely treat returning to Zhuyu as his top priority instead of doing such a thing. Before Xiangming and Kong arrived at that world, they greeted everyone and worked together to obstruct the whaley that was seeping through the crack. At this moment, Xiang Ju asked, "Fellow Xiangming, forgive me for being presumptuous, but what did you two talk about with fellow Xianyuan just now?" Xiangming laughed and said, "Fellow Taoist, why ask when you already know the answer? I originally wanted to suggest to fellow Taoist Xianyuan to look at everyone's names. That way, we would be able to distinguish who the spirit of creation is, but fellow Taoist Xianyuan didn't agree." Xiangming didn't expect that Xiangming would take the initiative to admit this matter. He said, "Fellow Taoist, this is destined to be a failure. Not only will we not agree, but fellow Taoist Xianyuan will also not agree." Xiangming laughed and cupped his hands. He said, "I hope that fellow Taoist won't reveal this matter, lest I become the target of public criticism." Xiang Ju said, "Fellow Taoist, you worry too much. I can see it, and so can everyone else. As long as there isn't any real action, no one will take it to heart." Xiangming said, "Actually, after arriving here, I discovered that there is a way. Perhaps we can identify the spirit of creation without needing to reveal our names." Xiangming was slightly surprised. Seeing that Xiangming didn't seem to be boasting, he also asked, "Then, may I ask what fellow Taoist's idea is?" Xiangming looked at the purple-robed Taoist who was being suppressed by the whaley and said, "That person is a part of the spirit of creation's whaley body. Now, he can't resist at all. If I spend some effort, I might be able to see the spirit of creation's real name. Even if I can't see it, I'll be able to tell who is similar to him and find the person who is borrowing his body." Xiangming looked at him deeply and said, "Fellow Taoist, you'd better be cautious when it comes to the spirit of creation. But I have a question. Since fellow Taoist has this ability, why didn't you tell fellow Taoist Xianyuan?" Xiangming said, "Because fellow Taoist Xianyuan is selfish." "Selfish?" Xiangming said with a faint smile, that's right. If fellow Taoist Xianyuan finds the spirit of creation's body, what right does he have to occupy the land of fortune that should have belonged to all of you? Xiang Ming looked at him and said, fellow Taoist Xiang Ming, you're thinking too much. Xiang Ming smiled and said, perhaps so. But fellow Taoist, have you ever thought about what we should do if fellow Taoist Xianyuan is the real spirit of creation? Xiang Ju said, although I don't like what fellow Taoist Xianyuan is doing, I don't think he's a creation spirit. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to protect Zhu Yu long ago, and we wouldn't be in the mood to talk here. Xiang Ming shook his head and said, no one is innocent. Even if he's really as you think, we shouldn't put all our hopes on him. Xiang Ming looked at him again and didn't say anything this time. Instead, he directly retreated from the divine will. Xiang Ming didn't leave. After a while, Ying Kong appeared and asked, how is it? Xiang Ming pondered for a moment and said, this person is very cautious with his words. I still can't see anything for the time being. Maybe we need to test him a few more times. Ying Kong said, the most powerful thing about the spirit of creation's body is that even the cultivators themselves can't distinguish it. If we want to find the spirit of creation, we can't just focus on this person. We have to examine ourselves repeatedly. Xiang Ming said, it's a pity that I can tell other people's names, but I can't tell my own name. Outsiders don't know my Tao. Even if I show them my real name, no one will be able to tell the truth. Ying Kong suddenly asked, fellow Taoist, just now you're saying that you can tell the name of the purple-clothed Taoist? Are you confident? Xiang Ming said meaningfully, I think so, but I don't think I can do it. Ying Kong thought for a while and nodded, let's think about it. After Zhang Yan parted ways with Ying Kong and Xiang Ming, he returned to Busu Tian. However, not long after he sat down, he felt something and entered the divine will. He saw the broken figure of the Taoist appearing again. He looked at it calmly. Previously, the Taoist was able to condense his figure because of the divine will. However, this time, he took the initiative to appear. This should be because of the crack in the void, which led to the Weili crossing over. The Taoist's figure was still blurry. He cupped his hands and said, greetings, fellow Taoist. Zhang Yan returned the greeting and said, fellow Taoist, you must have something to tell me. What can I do for you? The Taoist said, I just want to remind fellow Taoist. Although those Taoists don't seem to have any problems, no one can trust them. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, I don't trust anyone in the first place, not even you. The Taoist said, yes, even I can't trust you. Before fellow Taoist meets the spirit of creation, no one can be trusted. Zhang Yan saw that the Taoist had nothing else to say, so he waved his sleeves and dispersed the Taoist's figure. He pondered for a while. He had some guesses about the Taoist's background. However, when the robbery power broke through a few times, he had deliberately looked for it, but he didn't feel any Weili similar to the Taoist. However, it could also be that the Taoist's Weili was profound enough that it was hard to detect. As for the body that the spirit of creation had borrowed, he didn't think too much about it. Unless he really used Xiang Ming's method, he wouldn't be able to identify it. Moreover, with the gradual return of Zhu Dade, the threat that the Taoist could pose was limited. Even if the Taoist was really exposed, he had a way to suppress it. After collecting his thoughts, he put the two qi dynamics of the creation of Pauline that he had obtained just now together with what he had obtained previously. He deduced and evolved them in his mind, searching for the Tao within them. Due to his previous accumulation, he quickly straightened out the changes within, and his understanding of the Tao of strength greatly deepened. Each Taoist mastered a Tao technique, but only he mastered both qi and strength. Once he succeeded, he would have mastered two Tao techniques. If it was used in battle, it wouldn't be a simple addition of a method, but a completely different level. He suspected that the spirit of creation's main body was able to fight against all the Taoists because the Tao technique it mastered wasn't just one. If it obtained the Tao technique of the Taoists, it would undoubtedly become more and more powerful. Therefore, it was easy for him to rely on two Tao techniques to suppress his peers, but it wasn't enough to fight against the spirit of creation. he could only master more Tao techniques. However, he was powerless against the Tao techniques of the other Taoists. Not to mention that he couldn't obtain them. Even if he obtained them, he wouldn't be able to use them. Instead, they would be a burden. What he could find now was the Tao technique behind the spirit of creation. The closer the spirit of creation was to him, the more complete the Tao technique would be. Here, he would have to rely on the teachings of the teachings. Unfortunately, he could point out the general direction, but he couldn't directly interfere in this matter. He could only rely on the teachings of the teachings to develop itself. However, with the addition of Yingkong and Xiangming, this generation would definitely establish the Tao technique as well. In this way, there would be more opponents that could participate in the battle, and it would be beneficial for him to observe this Tao. He felt that he should try his best to find more of this missing Tao because this Tao technique was undoubtedly not mastered by the spirit of creation's main body. If he wanted to seek perfection, devouring the Taoists wasn't the only thing he needed. This Tao technique was similarly needed. Since his opponent needed it, then he couldn't let him have his way. Once he grasped it, so long as he still existed, it wouldn't be easily taken away by an outsider. Chapter 2276. While Zhang Yan was thinking about how to control more Taoist magics, he received a message from Yingkong and Xiangming. Both of them said that they could observe the purple-robed Taoist and see the true name of the good fortune spirit to determine who the good fortune spirit was. Just in case, they could use Yingkong as a witness. It didn't take much thought for him to reject the idea. It wasn't an easy thing to do. The Tao of Xiangming had different Taoist magics, so no one could be sure if he was telling the truth or not. Furthermore, the good fortune spirit had the ability to infect the great virtue, so there was nothing wrong with him. If he wasn't careful, he could get himself into trouble. Given the current situation, he needed to eliminate as many variables as possible, so he couldn't do this. However, he also knew that the two of them had already guessed that this would happen, and yet they still did it. They were probably trying to prove to him that they had no selfish motives, and hoped that he wouldn't target them. He hadn't planned to do that. He had already calculated that the two great virtue who were supposed to return with him might be stuck in the tribulation power, but they wouldn't be able to hold out for long. Once they returned, the remaining tribulation power would no longer be able to hold back the good fortune spirit. At that point, he needed to perfect his own Taoist magics, and not cause unnecessary trouble. In the mountain and sea realm, in the southern Civ 100 continents, there was a barren desert without any signs of life. Thousands of meters below the surface of the desert, there was a massive palace complex. Years ago, there had been no signs of life in this place, and it was only after Hong Yu's teachings that life began to grow. Most of the disciples were mortals, and cultivators couldn't interfere with the mortal world. They needed people to take care of them, feed them, and take care of them. Therefore, in addition to cultivators, most of the people here were servants. Currently, there were more than 200 disciples here, and the servants and attendants responsible for serving them numbered more than 10,000. For someone of Hong Yu's cultivation base, he could teach millions upon millions of disciples, but there was no need for that. Only the most talented disciples would be able to make progress in his teachings. That way, when they grew up, he would be able to see the many changes in his teachings. If he could find the flaws, he would be able to make his teachings even more perfect. At this moment, Hong Yu was receiving Ran Shushu. She was also the first visitor since Hong Yu established this place of inheritance. Ever since the last time they toured the various sects, Ran Shushu felt that Hong Yu's temperament was very much to his liking. No matter what you said, he would not be impatient. If you wanted to spar with him, he would agree to it. Most importantly, this was an extremely good opponent. Especially now that Hong Yu's chi had returned to its peak, he was even more satisfied. Where else could he find such a good opponent? He decided not to tell anyone at the door. At this moment, the two of them happened to talk about the Origin Jade. Ran Shoshu said, "In this battle for the Origin Jade, the ownership has already been determined. In the end, it was taken by Yan Jiao." Hong Yu said in a low voice, "It's not strange. The passageway between the two realms is controlled by the Yen sect, and the Yen sect's influence in the Dark Mirror sky isn't small. The possibility of them seizing the Origin Jade is the greatest. Ran Xiushu asked curiously, "Why aren't you fighting for the Origin Jade this time?" Hong Yu said, "Fellow Taoist didn't go as well." Ran Xiushu shook her head and said, "That's different. Shaoqing already has a Origin Jade, and I believe that my cultivation still needs to be sharpened. Why should I waste my effort on it?" Shaoqing's sect master, Yu Xianshao, was currently cultivating. Before there was a result, they wouldn't fight for the second Origin Jade. However, although they, the upper realm cultivators, didn't go, their disciples were sent to gain experience. Hong Yu said, "Fellow Taoist is right. Recently, I've been thinking about the defeat I suffered in front of the Origin Yang Gate. Although I dare not say that I saw anything clearly, I did gain something. The more I think about it, the more I feel that I haven't sharpened myself enough. Even if I obtain the Origin Jade, what's the use? It's very likely that I won't be able to enter the upper realm." At this moment, he already understood that this was actually because of the flaws in his innate cultivation method. Even if you don't understand the cultivation methods of the big sects in the beginning, the path is there. You just have to follow it. However, he was different. The Origin Yang sect's cultivation method had its limitations. It was something that he had forged by himself. Furthermore, he didn't know where he was going. Unless he was someone like Shinchong, he really couldn't compare to the upper echelons of the big sections. Fortunately, after reaching the third realm, he had endless time to immerse himself in polishing his cultivation method. Now, he was glad that he didn't delay his pursuit of the Origin Jade. At this moment, he said, "When these disciples have some achievements, I will take them to visit the various sects in the mountain and sea realm. When the time comes, I hope that your sect's disciples will not be stingy in teaching us." Ran Xiushu laughed and said, "Fellow Taoist's words are exactly what I want. I can't ask for more." In a place of fortune outside of Bu Su Heaven, in a certain world, a hut suddenly appeared in the sky. The interior of the hut was wide and spacious. Jiang Zheng was sitting cross-legged on a prayer mat. When he heard the ringing of a golden bell, he awoke from his meditation. Looking outside, he thought to himself, "I wonder where I am this time." Ever since he had obtained this hut, he had wandered around the myriad of heavens and realms. However, he rarely visited fellow Taoists. Most of the time, he traveled through the mountains and rivers, observing the vicissitudes of life and the changes of the world. Occasionally, if he came across someone with outstanding talent, he would enter the mortal world to give them some pointers and leave behind a legacy of his own. He felt that the mortal world was far more exciting than the rigid and dull life of many Taoist cultivators. As he experienced the different worlds, his state of mind gradually became more harmonious. Although he didn't deliberately cultivate, the growth of his cultivation was actually more beneficial than when he cultivated in seclusion. This wasn't to say that traveling was better than cultivation, but rather that such a cultivation method was more suitable for him. In fact, most Taoist cultivators tended to stick to the old ways, and often missed out on many opportunities. It was the same for him in the past. In fact, he admired freedom in his heart. In the past, in order to repay karma, he had always been tied to Penyuan sect. Later on, this fate came, and he followed his heart. Instead, his spirit was unobstructed, and his chi dynamic was more harmonious. He looked down and saw that this was the location of a planet. The vast ocean was divided into mountains and land, and the islands were scattered like stars. Looking down from the sky, the sea was blue, the air was white, and the red soil was black. It could be said that it was a colorful place that nurtured living beings. However, the spiritual vigor here was weak, and it only gathered in some special places. Seeing this, he couldn't help but nod. With a thought, a clone was cast onto the land and began to travel. However, he didn't deliberately use his mana to sense the living beings of the entire planet. That would be a lot less fun. Within a few years, he passed through mountains and oceans, and went to many places. He realized that there were living beings here, but most of them were uncivilized. Most of them wore animal skins and held wooden spears and stone axes. He originally thought that this world would be like this, until one day, he arrived at a high plateau. Just now, he realized that was not the case. There was a large country here, with a population of 10 million. They cultivated fertile fields, herded cows and horses, built cities with metallurgy, and built water conservancy projects. They were far different from the other places that ate raw meat and drank blood. When he looked again, he discovered that there was a Dharma altar in the middle of the country. Unexpectedly, there were many Taoist cultivators cultivating there. After observing for a while, he realized the origin of the altar. Teaching by Yen. He had encountered teaching by Yen a few times in his travels in the past, but he hadn't had any serious contact with it before. He thought that this sect seemed to have some connection with his master. With a thought, he arrived at the Dharma altar. The disciples guarding the altar didn't notice his arrival at all. The altar master seemed to sense something. Shocked, he hurriedly came out and asked, "May I ask which exalted one is here?" Jiang Zheng cupped his hands and said, "I am Jiang Zheng, traveling from the mountain and sea realm to this place. I saw that a fellow Taoist had set up a Dharma altar here, so I came to pay a visit." The altar master looked surprised. He hurriedly cupped his hands again and said, "So it's a exalted one from the mountain and sea realm. I am Mi Gu, the altar master of this altar." Jiang Zheng exchanged a few words with him and roughly understood the situation here. Then, he asked, "I see that every time you go to a place, you have to set up a spell altar and spread your Tao. Why is your sect doing this?" Mi Gu said, "Of course it's to spread the Tao." He paused for a moment, then cupped his hands and said, "My teaching of Yen believes that humans are born into the same body. The human races in the heavens and the 10,000 realms originally came from the same source. However, there are many demons, devils, and creatures in the void in this world. They are born as humans and don't know the Tao, so they can't resist. Since we are the first, we should naturally support those who come later. In this world, not only are there people of the Tao in places with abundant spiritual opportunity, there are also countless people in those places with barren spiritual opportunity. Since my teaching of Yen has a cultivation method that doesn't require spiritual opportunity, why don't we reach out and help?" Jiang Zheng nodded. Over the years, he had seen many people from the teaching of virtue and the teaching of Luo. Just like the teaching of Yen, they mainly spread their Tao. However, these two sects didn't care who their believers were, nor did they care about the safety of the living beings under their rule. In comparison, the teaching of Yen seemed to be more orderly. He nodded and said, "The human Tao is in a difficult situation. Without enlightenment, there is no way to fight against the beasts, and there is no way to fight against nature's power of creation. Regardless of the original intention of your honorable cult, at least everywhere I see, the human Tao benefits. This is a good move." Hearing his words, Mi Gu's attitude became more positive. He said, "I don't want you to agree with this idea. If I may be so bold, why don't you become the high official of the teaching of Yen?" Jiang Zheng smiled and asked, "If I agree, what do I need to do?" Mi Gu's expression turned serious. He said, "I hope that you can come and help when our branch altar is facing a great enemy. Of course, this is not an order. If you don't have time, it's fine if you don't come. If there are living beings in the branch altar that are attacked by the creatures of the void or big demons, I hope that you can help. My teaching of Yen will not let you help for no reason. We will give you an offering every time." After a pause, he said, "As the high official of the teaching of Yen, you can use any realm gate. In my teaching of Yen, there are many realm gates that can only be passed through by people in the teaching of Yen. If you are not a high official, you can use this to go to any one of them." Jiang Zheng nodded. In order to reduce the conflict with many sects, it was not as easy to pass through the realm gates of Yen as before. If he became a high official, it would be much more convenient to come and go. Most importantly, the teaching of Yen did not force him to do anything. Moreover, he did not dislike what the teaching of Yen did. He thought for a while and said with a smile, "There's no rush. What I've seen here is only a corner of your sect. I will go to your sect's headquarters in the future to decide on this matter. Chapter 2277. Zhang Yan stood on the altar of the Qinghuan Palace, his consciousness wandering through the Taos. Because when the next Vedanta came, the true body of the spirit of creation might come earlier. Because of this, he had to think of a countermeasure in advance. For this, he had been repeatedly deducing a way to break out of this situation. Uniting the Vedanta was one of the reasons, and the other was to perfect the Tao. It would be best if he could find the few creation Pauline that he still lacked here. After every Vedanta returned, they would summon the Pauline that had fallen into the Taos. These Pauline weren't summoned by the master, so it was usually impossible for outsiders to find them. But there were exceptions here as well. For example, the treasured lotus of fortune in his possession was obtained from the Taoist that transmitted his will to him, and he'd borrowed the vital energy and will of this Taoist. This meant that if he could borrow the chi or Tao of a certain Vedanta that hadn't appeared, he might be able to find the creation Pauline that person left behind. If one were to say who he had the deepest connection with in Tao, it would undoubtedly be the master of the demonic treasury. From the divine contract to Qi Lu, it could be said that he had a deep connection with him. He believed that this person was also a Vedanta, but he didn't know what method he used to achieve Tao. But as long as the Tao of strength was related to this person, then it was enough. If the Tao of strength advanced, there would also be a Tao that could be grasped, and he was currently in the midst of seizing it. Perhaps this was the original plan of the master of the demonic treasury. It was possible that this person had also walked this path, and now it would depend on who reached the end first. Previously, his understanding of this Tao was also limited, but as the chi of Pauline increased, his comprehension also gradually deepened. If he took a step further, then he might be able to reverse calculate this person. He didn't seek to see this person's original, as long as he could find the creation Pauline that this person grasped. Even if he couldn't find it, it didn't stop him from trying. Aside from the Tao of strength, the Tao behind the creation spirit was equally important. However, this place completely relied on the teachings of the evolution sect, so it was impossible for him to interfere. However, he'd already calculated that the evolution sect would have an extremely great opportunity to expand. So long as he was able to grab hold of it, then his understanding of this Tao technique would rise to another level. After he made up his mind moved, and he sent down another decree. In the blink of an eye, another 30 years passed. Originally, the myriad worlds had returned to peace after the Yuan Jade battle, but now, a major event had occurred that made all the cultivators uneasy. After the heavens experienced the spirit vigor in the present world had gradually returned to its original state. However, the downward trend did not stop. Instead, it continued to weaken. The main reason for this was due to the repeated clashes between the great virtues Weili and the creation spirits Weili. Any external force was suppressed. In addition, after the spirit vigor flourished, the number of cultivators in the all heavens increased tremendously. Most people used spirit vigor without restraint. Just now, there were such consequences. Within the Busu heaven, there were only a few realms that weren't affected, and the mountain and sea realm was one of them. With Zhang Yan's clone overseeing it, there naturally wouldn't be any problems. The second place was the Green Splendor Heaven. The Green Jade Palace was located there, and with Fu Qingming, a true yang cultivator, it naturally wouldn't run out of spirit vigor. In fact, it hadn't even shown signs of decline. The last place was the Kunsher continent, which was located in the myriad worlds of the Busu heaven. It had unlimited spirit vigor, so it didn't have to worry about this. On the Yuhuan All Heavens side, when the All Heavens Heaven Lords sensed this change, they all went to the Green Jade Palace, begging the Exalted One to stop this. Fu Qingming, however, didn't respond to their pleas. If he was still a Tao divinity, he would most likely still do his best to maintain the Yuhuan All Heavens, to ensure that the karma points restriction wouldn't be broken. But now that he had Zhang Yan's help, he had long since recovered his Dharma body, so he naturally didn't care about this. From his point of view, the rise and decline of spirit vigor wasn't just a change of the heavens and earth. It could also be a game between the almighty beings of the upper realm. Now that the one in the green jade palace hadn't spoken, he naturally wouldn't interfere in this matter. Bai Wei, Deng Zhang, and the 6 demon masters had also taken note of this. They all believed that if spirit vigor continued to decline, then the war between the Daos would inevitably begin. Because of this, although they didn't dare to personally intervene, they secretly pushed for it. Because the 6 demon masters had received a response after paying their respects to devil ancestor Qi Zhou, they had regained some of their confidence, so they were the most active among them. Nowadays, the Yuhuan All Heavens and the Mountain and Sea Realm were usually the most prosperous in the Busha Heaven. But that didn't mean that there weren't any powerful sects in the other realms. It was just that in the past, these sects were scattered in different realms, so they were relatively weak. But all of this had changed after a few major events. First, the Mountain and Sea Realm's magical battle festival attracted the cultivators of these sects to discuss Tao with the other sects, which greatly broadened their horizons. Second, the Mirror Lake cultivators invaded in large numbers. Although they were repelled by the cultivators of the Busha Heaven, the remaining poison of this generation hadn't been truly purged, and many superior techniques were thus spread. It must be said that these were all Taoist teachings passed down by the Prime High, which greatly increased the power of many cultivators in the remote realms. But that was all. These forces were too scattered, and couldn't gather in one place. But with the appearance of the Yanjiao sect, the realm gates were erected, and the myriad heavens and realms were connected. Things were very different, and many forces thus joined forces. This time, with the decline of spiritual qi, after these forces sensed the danger, and under the influence of some people, they all tried to find a way out. Among them, many forces tried to rope in and threaten the Yanjiao sect. This generation mainly wanted to control the realm gates, so it wouldn't be difficult to find a suitable place to hide spiritual qi. But Gao Qingtu didn't care. The decline of spiritual qi in the myriad heavens was a bad thing for others, but it was a good thing for the Yanjiao sect. This meant that the Yanjiao sect's techniques could be spread to more realms. Even if spiritual qi flourished in the future, the impact would not be erased. Moreover, the Yanjiao sect's opponents had never been the sects of the heavens, but the Luo sect, the Virtue sect, and the Tao techniques spread by the spirit of creation. These people were the real trouble. This was because the Yanjiao sect had a great advantage in terms of techniques. Other than places where spiritual qi was extinct, they could quickly spread Tao techniques and compete with the Yanjiao sect for believers. Before these sects were dealt with, the Yanjiao sect would not take the initiative to join the chess game of the sects of the heavens. In the sky shore realm, on a floating land, clear light floated, clouds were like pillars, Tao sounds were heard, and celestial qi was faintly discernible. In order to deal with the decline of spiritual qi, the upper echelons of more than 100 sects gathered here. In fact, most of the people here were the remnants of the Mirror Lake's invasion of Busu Heaven, and the rest were cultivators who had obtained the Tao techniques of the Mirror Lake cultivators, so their mana increased rapidly. Among them, the Honglai sect was the most powerful. The Honglai sect's leader, Ci Shu, was holding a horsetail whisk as he stood on the jade platform. He spoke to the leaders of the sects on both sides, fellow Taoists, due to the decline of spiritual qi in the myriad heavens. If this continues, it will be difficult for our cultivation to continue, and the lineage of our sects may also be cut off. Therefore, I have no choice but to invite all of you here to work together to find a way forward. Someone below said, fellow Ci Shu, since you invited us here, you must have made some preparations. Why don't you tell us? Seeing that everyone was looking at him, Ci Shu slowly said, if that's the case, I'll say it. He paused for a moment, then said, actually, this matter can be difficult, but it can also be easy. Our realm does not lack spiritual qi, so we should go to a place with abundant spiritual qi. Currently, in the myriad heavens and realms, there are 2 places that we can go. One is the Qinghua heaven, and the other is the mountain and sea realm. Someone was puzzled, fellow Taoist, why not go to the Kunshu continent? With our power, it shouldn't be difficult to occupy a place here, right? Why do we have to risk our lives against these 2 sects? Ci Shu said, the Kunshu continent is indeed a suitable place. Originally, it was enough to accommodate all of us, but when I visited the Divine Lord there, he used the excuse that he was afraid that we would break the rules as an excuse and did not allow us to enter together. He requested that we enter one by one within 3,000 years. Everyone below frowned. This request was not a big deal. Under normal circumstances, it would be very reasonable. They could afford to wait for 3,000 years. However, seeing that the spiritual chi was declining rapidly, who knew how bad the situation would become? In the end, it might not even be enough for them to use. One must know that even great cultivators who had severed their past and future did not have an unlimited lifespan. They could only survive by relying on purple clear spiritual chi. If they waited for thousands of years, they might run out of lifespan. Moreover, who would enter first was also a problem. In the face of a matter of life and death and the inheritance of the sect, no one could give in. Ci Shu said, therefore, we have to choose a place to attack. Of course, fighting is not my wish. If we can use the situation to negotiate with them and let us enter, then we can avoid a disaster for both sides. In fact, he knew that this was most likely impossible. Why would they let go of the place that they had painstakingly opened up for them? Therefore, there would definitely be a fierce battle in the end. But this was his original goal. He was a Mirror Lake cultivator. The reason he had been able to survive the invasion of the Mirror Lake was because he had been secretly taken in by the heavenly demons. There was a price to be paid here. The heavenly demons did not want him to bring his disciples to the Kunchi continent. Instead, they wanted them to attack the mountain and sea realm or the myriad heavens. Only then could there be a great war between the Daos. Someone said, what if we attack the Kunchi continent instead? Ci Shu shook his head. That is impossible. To enter the Kunchi continent, we need to go through the world rings set up by the four great Yuanzun, which are controlled by the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm and the Qinghua heavens. Everyone was speechless. Everything was back to square one. Someone else said, but fellow Taoist Ci Shu, I have heard that the two sects are backed by the creator Yuanzun. If we offend Yuanzun, wouldn't we be seeking our own deaths? When the sect leaders heard this, their faces flickered, and they began to feel the urge to retreat. Ci Shu smiled and comforted them. Everyone, there is no need to worry about this. What kind of person is the creator Yuanzun? Why would he interfere in the affairs of the mortal world? Besides, since I have brought this up, why would I want to harm you? He waved his sleeve, and several memorial tablets appeared behind him. He pointed at them and said, as long as you pay your respects to these tablets, then you will be protected by Yuanzun in the future. That way, there will be no problems. Chapter 2278. Everyone looked at the tablets, and saw that there were 7 of them. One of them was placed at the top, while the other 6 were below it. Many of the people present had come from the Mirror Lake, but after coming into contact with Taoist Busu, they had also learned of the name of the world creator, Yuanzun. However, they found it strange that none of the names on the tablets matched what they knew. They couldn't help but feel puzzled. Ci Shu didn't hide anything. He bowed, then pointed to the 6 tablets and said, these are the tablets of the Devil Lord. Devil Lord? Everyone's faces fell. Some of them had only just learned of the existence of heavenly devils from the outer realm. They knew that these devils could stealthily infiltrate people's minds and alter their memories. In the past, they had invaded the world several times, but had always been stopped by cultivators of the Tao, which was why they were rarely seen. When it came to devils like these, they would avoid them as much as possible. They had never imagined that this person would take the initiative to put them in front of them. Even if you wanted to back out now, it was too late. If you didn't know about this beforehand, it would be one thing. But now that you saw the tablets of the Devil Lord, not only did you not pay your respects, you even resisted. The Devil Lord might not pay attention to those who paid their respects to him, but he would never forget those who disrespected him. One of the Daorans stepped forward and said, fellow Taoist Ci Shu, you owe us an explanation. Ci Shu straightened up in front of the tablets and turned to meet everyone's eyes. Why are you all so alarmed? If we have the support of the 6 devil lords, why would we need to fear the mountain and sea realm or the azure splendor heavens Yuan-Zun? Besides, he turned to the side and clasped his hands. Have you all not noticed the one at the top? Everyone raised their heads to look at the memorial tablet. There seemed to be no words on it, but when they looked at it again, they felt as if something had been imprinted in their hearts. For some reason, they knew the honorific name on the tablet. For a moment, everyone was bewildered. As if they had thought of something, the old Taoist hesitated and said, "Could this person be?" Ci Shu said, "If the 6 below us should be called devil lords, then the one at the top should be called the devil lord. He is the source of all devils, and can be called the ancestor of all devils." Ancestor of all devils? The cultivators present, regardless of their level of cultivation, were all shocked. Many of them came from the Mirror Lake, and their Tao techniques were imparted by the Taishang. They immediately thought that the devil ancestor who stood high above them should also be a Taishang. Ci Shu said, "If that's the case, does anyone have any objections?" At this moment, everyone no longer had the slightest bit of unwillingness. If they could rely on the Supreme, what was there to be afraid of? As for this Taishang not being a human path almighty being, there was nothing to worry about at this time. At that level, all living beings in the world were probably ordinary in their eyes. There was no difference. After sorting out their thoughts, everyone went to pay their respects in front of the memorial tablet. After everyone finished burning incense and offering their respects, Ci Shu invited them to sit down. "There's one thing we need to discuss," she said. "We can only attack one of the Qinghua heaven and the mountain and sea realm. Fellow Taoists, which one do you prefer?" Taoist Daoran stroked his beard for a moment, then said, "The cultivators of the mountain and sea realm have incredible battle prowess, and there are many restrictive spells in the outer heavens. Their Taoist magics are brilliant as well. We might as well attack the Qinghua heaven's green jade palace." Taoist Bu Su had personally gone to the mountain and sea realm's grand magical competition. The mountain and sea realm was heavily guarded, led by the Qinsang sect and the Shaoqing sect. Their cultivators were especially skilled in magical battles, and the waters of the realm were deep. Therefore, he felt that it would be better to attack the Qinghua heaven. After Daoran finished speaking, everyone began to voice their opinions. However, they were evenly split, and no one was able to come to a conclusion. At this point, Ci Shu said, "In my humble opinion, we should attack the mountain and sea realm." Someone asked, "Why is that?" Ci Shu replied, "The green jade palace of the Qinghua heaven is the leader of the remnant heavens, and governs 19 heavens. In the past, the lords of the heavens were all cultivators of enlightenment crossing. Although that is no longer the case, there are still quite a few outstanding figures. Furthermore, the green jade palace would only need to issue a command to summon them. How could we possibly compete with them?" When the people who had insisted on attacking the Qinghua heaven heard this, they were speechless. If attacking the Qinghua heaven would attract the attention of all the almighty experts of the remnant heavens, then they naturally wouldn't do such a thing. Seeing that they were silent, Ci Shu continued, "At the moment, the mountain and sea realm doesn't have a single cultivator of enlightenment crossing. At most, we can sever our past and future bodies. As long as we can break through the restrictive spells in the outer heavens, we will at least be evenly matched. Actually, we don't necessarily need to fight them for victory or defeat. We can negotiate with them first. If they allow us to stay in the mountain and sea realm, that would be a win-win situation." Daoran thought about it for a moment, then shook his head. "The cultivators of the mountain and sea realm definitely won't back down. We'll most likely have to fight them." Everyone agreed. If they were in Ci Shu's shoes, they wouldn't agree to such a thing either. Ci Shu said, "Diplomacy before force. If the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm don't comply, then we'll just have to fight them to the bitter end." One of the Taoists said, "I heard that the mountain and sea realm is on good terms with the remnant heavens. If we attack the mountain and sea realm, will they come to our aid?" Everyone looked at Ci Shu. If attacking the mountain and sea realm would cause the cultivators of the remnant heavens to join forces, then it would be a foolish decision. Ci Shu calmly said, let's first talk about the Taoist cultivators of the remnant heavens. There are deep conflicts between each other, and if it weren't for the Green Jade Palace, then why would they stand up for others? Furthermore, I've been in contact with some of the heavenly lords, and promised them that after I take over the mountain and sea realm, I'll give them some territory. I don't ask for their help, just that they don't cause trouble. Everyone was a bit dissatisfied. They were clearly the ones doing the fighting, so why did they end up giving benefits to others? Who knew, they might even turn the tables on them. The Taoist Daoran said, we can discuss this matter after we take over the mountain and sea realm. Our top priority right now is to enter the realm and seize the pure violet spiritual qi. That is the only way we can preserve our Dharma bodies. Ci Shu said, don't worry, everyone. There is no formal agreement between us. This is just a discussion of divine will. There is no contract to bind us. If we can't come to an agreement, then we'll think about it again. When the cultivators of the various sects heard this, they put the matter aside for the time being. After all, their lives were more important. Who knew how long the pure violet spiritual qi they had gathered would last? Although there was still pure violet spiritual qi flowing out of the Qinghua heaven, most of it had already been taken by the cultivators of the remnant heavens. It wasn't their turn. Taking over a place rich with spiritual qi was the right thing to do. After some more discussion, they finally decided that they would join forces to attack the mountain and sea realm. Ci Shu looked on coldly. Although he was trying to encourage them, he knew that the mountain and sea realm wouldn't be easy to take down. He just wanted to give the Devil Masters an explanation. Even if things didn't work out in the end, he wouldn't be the one to die. Actually, he knew deep down that this was probably a game of chess between the Demon Masters and the four-era creation Yuan venerates. All of them were chess pieces. However, he didn't care about that. If he won, then he would be able to take over a realm. If he lost, then there would be fewer people fighting over the pure violet spiritual qi. In the end, all that mattered was that he could get through this. Although Ci Shu's discussion about attacking the mountains and seas was done in secret, it was a matter of personal safety. Anyone with a cultivation base of a certain level would be able to sense it. Because Ci Shu had spoken to the remnant heavens beforehand, someone had secretly leaked the matter to the various sects of the mountain and sea realm. When Ing Chuanqiu, Meng Zhida, Shui Dingyuan and the others heard about it, they gathered everyone together to discuss countermeasures. After learning that this person was most likely a remnant of the previous invasion of the heavens, no one took the matter to heart. After all, this person's plan was doomed to fail. Ignoring the fact that the mountain and sea realm's grand protective spell formation was connected to the mountains, seas, lands, and billions of planets, it was impossible for them to succeed. Even the sun and moon monarchs were enough to suppress the situation. True Yang Taoists wouldn't interfere with mortal affairs, but the sun and moon monarchs wouldn't ignore them. If this person could fight the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm, it would be because the mountain and sea realm was willing to fight them. Sun Jian smiled and said, that's a good thing. It's rare for someone to practice with us. We might as well let them in. What do you think, fellow Taoist Lu? Lu Shirong looked at him cautiously and said seriously, I won't let you have them. Sun Huaying said calmly, let them come. Ing Chuanqiu looked at the two of them, shook his head, and said, we can use this person to spread the name of the various sects of the mountain and sea realm. Meng Zhida asked the others, and when he saw that no one had any objections, he said, since everyone is of the same opinion, let's let this person in. Zhang Yan had also noticed what was going on in Bushutian, but he didn't pay much attention to it. Such a small matter could be handled by the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm. Right now, his attention was focused on seizing the Taoist techniques. Now, as the spiritual opportunity continued to weaken, the Yen sect also understood his intentions, and continued to expand. Now, there were more and more followers, which meant that more and more of the good fortune spirits were on his side. If this continued, he would be able to observe more Taoist techniques. As he was thinking, he suddenly had a feeling, and said to the formation spirit, "Fellow Taoist Dan E will be here in a moment. Go outside and wait for him." The formation spirit waited for a while, and sure enough, when it saw Dan E, it bowed deeply and said, "Grand Elder, Master knows that Grand Elder is coming, and is already waiting in the palace." Dan E nodded and followed the formation spirit into the inner room. After greeting Zhang Yan, he sat down and said, "Recently, I have been thinking about what fellow Taoist has said. The good fortune spirits not only endanger fellow Taoists, but also harm all living things in the world. Although I can't stop them, I am willing to help." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Fellow Taoist, thank you for your concern. What do you want to do?" Dan E said, "Since there are still many good fortune spirits in this world, I am willing to create a clone of my consciousness to enter the world and guide them to the right path. As for those cultivators who have already understood their path, if they have the opportunity, they will have a chance to enter the realm of my generation. I am willing to give them a few pointers. Will fellow Taoist allow me to do so?" Zhang Yan nodded slightly. Dan Yi was the Grand Elder of the God Refinement Realm, and it was extremely rare for him to be willing to personally teach the right path. He smiled and said, "Since fellow Taoist has such intentions, why would I stop you? However, the mysteries of heaven are obscure, and the good fortune spirits may be coming soon. Fellow Taoist, you must guard your Taoist techniques and not lose your original heart." Chapter 2279. After Dan Yi came out from Qinghuan Palace, he returned to Cheongshao Heaven. When he sat down in his cave abode, he sent many of his doppelgangers to the lower realm to search for the bodies of the spirits of creation. He had to keep a close eye on those who obeyed the Tao, but it did not mean that he could ignore those who cultivated on his own path. If one's confidence was not firm, he might be led astray. Hence, everyone here had to be under his watch. In this way, even if something went wrong, he could ensure that this generation would not be dragged to the other side immediately. He knew that the Zhou Huanyuan jade was the key to preventing the spirits of creation from attaining their bodies. Hence, even if most of the spirits of creation reincarnated as humans, there was no hope for them to succeed. However, it was difficult to suppress the spirits of creation from the unknown land. He understood from Zhang Yan that he and a group of fellow Taoists were keeping an eye out and trying to prevent such a thing from happening. However, he did not think that this would put him at ease. The spirits of creation Whaley would definitely look for all kinds of loopholes. As the real body of the spirits of creation was getting closer and closer, as long as there was a slight carelessness, it might succeed. Moreover, the primordial jade was something that even deity refinement cultivators could not interfere with before they entered the world. However, after they entered the world, it could be moved around by others. Hence, he released a consciousness to wander back and forth in the world. Others might not be able to find the spirits of creation hidden in the unknown world, but if he worked hard, he might still be able to find them. In the world of Bushutian, after the spiritual vigor weakened, all the cultivators who realized that their cultivation was not enough tried to find a way out. However, the sects that temporarily had rich spiritual vigor were unusually vigilant, fearing that others would come and rob them. However, this generation was not without worries, because they did not know when they would face such a situation. Some tyrannical sects had migrated to the Kunsher continent. However, most of the places where cultivators could establish a foothold were occupied by various forces. Although there was a large area in the wasteland, the demons and monsters there were also tyrannical. Without a cultivator of the Grotto Heaven level to hold the fort, it was impossible for them to survive. This had already cut off the hopes of the small sections. Among the heavens and realms, other than a few areas that were not lacking in spiritual vigor, only the Yinjiao was not affected at all. This was because they did not have to invade the land that was rich in spiritual vigor, and they did not have to worry about others finding trouble with them. It should be known that most of the branch altars of the sect of Yen were located in remote places or even places where spiritual opportunity was extinct. Even if Taoist cultivators were to seize territories, it wouldn't be their turn. At this moment, the entire sect was taking advantage of the fact that there was no one holding them back to expand their influence and educate the masses. After all, the bigger the shop, the more followers they could get, and the more likely it was that someone with outstanding aptitude would appear. That day, when the headmaster Gao Qingtu was going through the memorials, an elder in charge of communicating with other sects came to report, saying that recently, there were quite a few sects from other realms, saying that they were all willing to join our Yen sect. Gao Qingtu asked, "Is it because of the decline of Spiritium?" Elder Daoren, exactly. I heard that my Yanjiao cultivation doesn't require spiritual opportunity and can lead to the great Tao. Therefore, he came to seek refuge with me. In fact, it wasn't that there weren't such people in the past. However, Sect Yen didn't accept everyone. The disciples were either cultivated from a young age or had never practiced Tao techniques before. These people were truly worthy of trust. Gao Qingtu said, "If they are willing to worship the headmaster, I can give them the identity of a cultivator outside the sect. I can also give them the cultivation method, but they must swear not to spread it outside, and they must be willing to listen to my orders." He paused. "If this person agrees, then it will be of some use to me." The elder understood tacitly. This was using these people to deal with those troublesome enemies for the Yen sect. This was an overt plot. Since you have obtained the cultivation method, then you must work for the Yen sect. If you don't agree, feel free to leave. The Yen sect does not need this person. In the void, in the world created by the joint efforts of the Vedanta, everyone was guiding the spirit of creation Wei, using it to search for the land of creation. However, at this moment, the atmosphere was tense, and everyone's expression was solemn. It was not difficult for them to feel that perhaps after the calamity power broke through again, the true body of the spirit of creation would also fall into everyone's possession. Wei Ming sighed, "If I can complete my Tao, not only will I be able to recover my strength, but I will also be able to know many things that I should not know." Ji Zhuang said in a low voice, "Just do your best, and recover as much as you can." They all knew that the loss of the Wei was definitely related to the shattering of the spirit of creation. With the guidance of cultivation, they might be able to slowly recover part of their strength. However, the threat of the spirit of creation was imminent, and there was not much chance for them to slowly recover their strength. Xiang Ju smiled and said without any nervousness, "With the two Taoist friends Xianyuan and Hongdu here, why do you all need to worry about this?" Wei Ming frowned. "Could it be that Taoist friend is willing to entrust your life and death to others?" Xiang Ju said indifferently, "Everyone should know that if the spirit of creation comes in person, only these two can go forward to resist it. We want to stand up, but it is a waste of effort." Heng Wu had been ignoring the crowd. In his opinion, instead of wasting his breath arguing, it was better to recover some of the Wei. At this moment, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. He could not help but look in a certain direction, and his expression froze. The purple-clothed Taoist who was being suppressed there had opened his eyes and was looking at him with a strange gaze. Originally, after being suppressed, it was impossible for him to have such a reaction, because once his consciousness came out, he would collapse on his own and get rid of their suppression. Heng Wu immediately realized that this was not a problem with him, but an external force that had borrowed his body to do things. He said in a low voice, "Who are you?" The purple-clothed Taoist did not say anything, only revealed a look of contempt, and then closed his eyes again. Heng Wu made a slight analysis and found that the power did not belong to the purple-clothed Taoist, but an external force that had seeped in through the gaps of their Wei. Logically, their suppression should be seamless, so he immediately thought, could it be that the spirit of creation among them had borrowed his body to do this? But what was the purpose of this? After all, he hadn't accomplished anything and had instead exposed himself. He couldn't help but think that he didn't notice such a strange change before. It only appeared after Ing Kong and Xiang Ming arrived. Could it be related to these two? However, this did not prove that there was something wrong with the two of them. Perhaps the power that had invaded the purple-clothed Taoist's body had been deliberately luring him into thinking this way in order to cause internal strife. After thinking for a long time, he sent a divine will to Bu Su Tian. He felt that he could not judge this matter, so he could only let someone else do it. Although he had always believed that Zhang Yan could not be completely ruled out as a suspect, at this time, even he did not dare to believe himself, so he might as well choose the most powerful person to trust. On the other side, although Kong and Xiang Ming were also participating in the suppression of the purple-clothed Taoist, they were far away from the others and were sitting in a remote corner. Ever since they arrived, they had seen their fellow Taoists one by one. They felt that this man was very worthy of their vigilance. Next to him was Ji Zhuang. This was because this person had joined the Zhu clan very early, and even the Mirror Lake belonged to him. Thus, the two of them had cast suspicious gazes towards this person. He had only invited this person to discuss the method a few times, but he had not found any flaws. Conversely, they were able to sense that the spirit of creation was examining them as well. The spirit of creation seemed to be investigating their objective, and the spirit of creation suspected that they were reincarnated into the world. Among them, Taoist Feng Du was the one who did not look like it the most. This was because he had once led a group of people to banish the clone of the spirit of creation. It could be said that he had forever taken away a portion of the spirit of creation's Weili, and his contribution was not small. However, there were also doubtful points. After all, this person's actions had caused the spirit of creation to fall into the all-beings ahead of time. Moreover, a small portion of the spirit of creation's power that had been destroyed had been dispersed into the all-beings. Most importantly, the portion of power that had been lost couldn't be considered a great loss to the spirit of creation's true body. Zhang Yan was the least suspicious person here, but was that really the case? They did not dare to be sure. The spirit of creation's thoughts were not something that he could accurately predict. Seeing that Kong had been silent and seemed to be thinking about something, Xiang Ming could not help but ask curiously, "Fellow Taoist, what are you thinking about? Could it be that you feel that something is wrong?" Kong said slowly, "I'm very interested in how the purple-clothed Taoist would reform after he disintegrated himself. As the saying goes, there's no fullness, there's no emptiness. Even if this person disintegrated, there must be an external force that could make him reappear." Xiang Ming smiled and said, "Then it must be the change in the spirit of creation's Weili." Kong nodded and said, "Fellow Taoist is right. This person must be related to the spirit of creation's Weili. Otherwise, there wouldn't be such a change." At this point, he changed the topic. "Doesn't this mean that as long as we disintegrate ourselves, we can prove that we are not related to the spirit of creation's Weili?" Xiang Ming's eyes moved, and he said, "Fellow Taoist, are you trying to use this method to find the body that reincarnated into the world? But if I'm not wrong, only fellow Taoist can use his own Tao technique to confirm whether there is any Weili involved, and others can't determine whether it's true or false?" Kong was silent for a moment, and he nodded. Xiang Ming shook his head. This was another dead end. This was the same logic as when he tried to see everyone's real name. Even if you could see something wrong, but others couldn't see it, how could you prove that what you saw was definitely correct? If you couldn't even prove it yourself, how could you tell others? Kong said, "There's a way. If I temporarily entrust my own Tao technique to fellow Taoist Xian Yuan, then he might be able to verify it for me." Xiang Ming was shocked, and he said, "Fellow Taoist, have you thought it through? The Tao technique that a great virtue possessed was the most fundamental thing. If he showed it to other great virtues, although it wouldn't be taken away, he would never be able to gain the upper hand in front of that person." However, Kong was unusually calm, and he said indifferently, "Fellow Taoist, you don't have to be so surprised. Even if you and I have all the Tao techniques, we are still no match for Taoist Xian Yuan. So it doesn't matter if I show him my Tao technique." Chapter 2280. After C.I. Shu and the other Mirror Lake Taoist cultivators were done with their internal affairs, they gathered everyone together and entered the Sea of Vital Energy to attack the mountain and sea realm. As of this moment, all eyes were on the heavens and 10,000 realms. Some of them were even looking forward to it. They had heard that the mountain and sea realms still had abundant spiritual energy, and showed no signs of weakening. If the foreign Taoist cultivators managed to attack it, then they might be able to take advantage of the chaos to enter and seize some territory. Furthermore, if the invaders were defeated, then the spiritual energy of the world realm should not have been depleted. In that case, they might be able to take advantage of the situation and reap some benefits. Outside of the mountain and sea realm, the Mirror Lake Taoist cultivators had arrived. Because of the Mountain and Sea Grand Magical Competition, they knew that the Mountain and Sea realm was protected by a restrictive spell formation. Therefore, they had prepared magical items and tools to break through the spell formation. However, to everyone's astonishment, after only a few attacks, the seemingly incomparably sturdy spell formation began to crack open. They couldn't help but suspect that it was a trap to lure the enemy in. When Ci Shu saw the bewilderment on everyone's faces, he laughed and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we've made inquiries about the background of the various sects and clans of the Mountain and Sea realm. We came here to enter the Mountain and Sea realm, and now that the door has been opened so easily, it doesn't matter if it's a trap or not. Do you really think we're afraid of them?" Everyone agreed with him. So what if there was some sort of trap inside? Back when the Mirror Lake Taoist had attacked the Bushu heavens, they had brought with them countless formation-destroying treasures. Even now, they still had quite a few. Even if they were surrounded by restrictive spell formations, they would still be able to fight their way out. Because everything that needed to be prepared was well prepared, after exchanging a few more words with each other, the group of people broke into the gap one after another. In the vast universe heaven, in the Green Jade Palace, Hall Elder Peng Xinhu was watching the Mountain and Sea realm with elders Guan Longzhao and Feng Lan, waiting for the outcome of the battle. Guan Longzhao said, "Who do you think will win, Elder?" Elder Peng slowly replied, "The fellow Taoists of the Mountain and Sea realm opened the door to let them in. That means they are confident in their ability to win. The outcome of the battle has long since been decided." Feng Lan smiled and said, "Although the people who attacked this time are skilled, they are not of the same mind. They all have their own plans. The sects of the Mountain and Sea realm probably let them go into fight because it is rare for them to meet a worthy opponent." Guan Longzhao said, "With so many Shangzhen in one place, I'm afraid we won't be able to see the outcome of the battle in a short time." Elder Peng's voice was low as he said, "If we leave these foreign Taoist cultivators alive, there'll be a disaster. If our fellow Taoists of the Mountain and Sea realm can't get rid of them, then we'll have to do it for them." In the headquarters of the Yen Order, Gao Qingtu was looking at the map. Recently, the Yen Order had made a lot of expansions, but not all of them were smooth. The realms without any spiritual vigor were fine, but some of the realms with weak spiritual vigor were frequently attacked by foreign cultivators. In addition to cultivators, the outsiders and demons had also sensed the danger. There were also many conflicts between the Yen Order and them. It could be said that in the entire sphere of influence of the Yen Order, the attacks and battles were almost non-stop. A disciple walked out from the hall and said softly, "Sect leader, a Shangzhen is here to visit you. He said that he has something important to discuss with you." As he spoke, he added, "This Shangzhen has a recommendation letter from the Green Jade Palace." Gao Qingtu didn't want to see him, but when he heard this, he thought about it and said, "Invite him to the main hall." After all, Green Jade Palace was under Yuan Zun and had dealings with the Yen Order. Gao Qingtu had to give them some face. He put down what he was doing and went to the main hall. Before long, a handsome Taoist walked in. He cupped his hands and said, "Sect leader Gao, I am Ran Guanyue, a Taoist cultivator from the Yuhuan heavens. Greetings." After Gao Qingtu returned the greeting, he asked, "Taoist friend, what brings you here?" Ran Guanyue said sincerely, "I'm here today with the hope that your sect can close the realm gate and cut off the path between the heavens and realms." Gao Qingtu was surprised and asked, "Why is that? Can Taoist friend tell me the reason?" Ran Guanyue said seriously, "Sect leader Gao, the heavens and realms are in chaos now. Although this is due to the weakening of spiritual vigor, it is also due to your sect's realm gate that can pass through the realms. If your sect can close the gate, then even if the other sects have the idea, they can't do it." Gao Qingtu looked at her and said, "Who are you speaking for, Taoist friend?" Ran Guanyue said seriously, "Of course I'm speaking for the billions of Taoists in the heavens and realms." Gao Qingtu pondered for a while and said, "Taoist friend, the realm gate is a matter of great importance. Moreover, with the weakening of spiritual vigor, even if the realm gate is closed, it can't stop the Taoists from killing each other." Ran Guanyue nodded and said, I understand the difficulty that sect leader Gao mentioned. If my sect is determined, it's not difficult to change this matter. As he said this, he said sincerely, if we can take out the teaching yen technique and let the cultivators in the heavens and realms study it, then we can definitely save the world. Gao Qingtu was stunned. To ask a sect to hand over their own technique so naturally, what was this person thinking? Could it be that he had lost his mind? After trying to chat with him for a while, he could basically confirm that this person's attitude was not fake, but seemed to really think so in the depths of his heart. He secretly shook his head. To worry about the Taoists in the heavens and to contribute for free, this person was overestimating him. Moreover, even if the teaching yen technique was taken out, if the cultivators all agreed with it, then it would be fine. But if it was so easy to get the technique, who would care about it? It should be known that now was not the time when Taoist techniques were cut off. After understanding that this person was just an arrogant person, he suddenly lost interest in talking and said in a flat voice, what fellow Taoist said does make some sense, but the matter of teaching yen is not something that I can hastily decide alone. I will consider it carefully later. Ran Guanyue stood up and said loudly, now that the heavens and realms are in danger, it's time for a big sect like the teaching yen to stand up and maintain justice and not shirk responsibility. I will wait outside for sect leader Gao's reply. Gao Qingtu frowned when he heard this. After sending her away, he pondered for a moment and called for a trusted disciple, saying, go and investigate this person's background and how he got in touch with the Green Jade Palace. The disciple only went for a few days before he sent back the information he had inquired. Ran Guanyue's cultivation experience was very clear. The sect used everyone to serve one person. From the moment he stepped on the path of cultivation, he had never left the sect. Perhaps it was because of his extraordinary aptitude that he could cultivate to such a level. However, this person had never experienced anything and had little contact with people of the same path. As for the recommendation letter, it was exchanged with good deeds. It was just that no one had done this before. Gao Qingtu faintly felt that this matter was definitely not so simple. He did not want such a person to cause trouble for himself when the teaching yen was expanding. So he took care and said, pass my order to Elder Yuan, try to keep a close eye on this person and observe his every move. In Busushan, Zhang Yan was originally deducing Taoist techniques. However, he first received Heng Wu's will, and then there was the rumor that the matter the two were talking about was actually the same. They were both borrowing the body of the spirit of creation that was hiding among them. If the purple-clothed Taoist was really capable of doing anything, then there was no need for him to expose himself first. He could have taken the opportunity to escape. It was nothing more than provoking everyone to suspect each other. This kind of method was very crude and not worth paying attention to. However, Ing Kong was willing to show his Taoist techniques to him and try to identify the request of the spirit of creation to borrow his body. There was some value in this. Ing Kong's reason was that before encountering a great enemy, he needed to resolve the internal instability on his side. Therefore, he had to find out who the spirit of creation was. Zhang Yan thought for a while. He did not care about this matter previously because there was indeed no good way to identify the spirit of creation. Unless he used his strength to pressure everyone, but it was not necessarily as he wished. He originally planned to slowly deal with this matter after his Taoist techniques had reached a certain level. However, since Ing Kong was willing to take the initiative to help, he would not refuse. Even if he could not find the spirit of creation to borrow his body in the end, it would not be too much of a hindrance. Therefore, with a move of his mind, he instantly turned inexplicable. After a while, Ing Kong's divine will also arrived. He bowed and said, greetings, fellow Taoist. Zhang Yan also bowed and said, have you thought about it carefully? Ing Kong said calmly, the body that the spirit of creation has entrusted to me must be eliminated. The people here are not trustworthy enough. In comparison, only fellow Taoist can be trusted. Zhang Yan smiled and said, however, fellow Taoist needs to know that the spirit of creation's Taoist techniques are above us. I do not know what kind of changes there will be. Therefore, if we use fellow Taoist's technique, it is very likely that we will not be able to find it in the end. Kong said, I know this, but it is still better than doing nothing. With the spirit of creation among us, there are indeed too many variables. If the spirit of creation arrives and we are defeated because of the hidden dangers in our bodies, wouldn't that be unfair? At that time, what is the use of me keeping my Taoist techniques? Zhang Yan said, it is good that fellow Taoist has made up his mind. Kong said, since I have chosen this path, I will naturally not regret it. At this moment, his tone suddenly became serious and said, fellow Taoist Xian Yuan, when the time comes to investigate, I am the spirit of creation's Taoist. Please do not hold back. He believed that if he was really borrowing the spirit of creation's body, then he would no longer be himself. Once the spirit of creation gained power, he would be destroyed forever. If that was really the case, unless he defeated the spirit of creation, then he would not be able to appear again. Zhang Yan nodded slightly. Kong no longer hesitated. He immediately changed his mind and displayed his Taoist techniques without any concealment. Zhang Yan looked over. In an instant, countless mysterious techniques entered his mind. At this moment, he seemed to be cultivating this Taoist technique step by step. He understood that this was because he did not understand this Taoist technique previously. Therefore, he was unable to accept it immediately. Therefore, he could only go from shallow to deep. Only at the end, he could clearly see the changes in the profound parts. This was known as the hidden secret of every Vedanta. Needless to say, his Taoist techniques were far superior to Kong's. Even if he was not as good as Kong, after observing it once, all of Kong's Taoist techniques were no longer profound in front of him. Chapter 2281. Somewhere in the boundless void of the mountain and sea realm, a black hole suddenly opened up. Beams of clear light shone down, and Ci Shu and the other foreign Taoist cultivators appeared. They looked around and found that they were not actually on the land mass. Instead, they were surrounded by countless stars, which formed a spell formation. Although they could see the boundless mountain, sea, earth, and land mass, they were still very far away. Furthermore, there were countless spell formations separating them, so getting there would not be easy. However, no one was in a hurry to get there. Mortal metamorphosis cultivators could easily destroy heaven and earth, and the various sects of the mountain and sea realm did not want the mountain, sea, and land mass to be damaged. Therefore, they had lured them out into the void. As of this moment, they viewed the realm as their own, and did not want to destroy the mountain, sea, and land mass. Therefore, they decided to fight outside. It was at this point that the surrounding spell formations began to shine with clear light, and numerous figures of Taoist cultivators appeared. The Mirror Lake cultivators had come to fight with the Taoist cultivators of the mountain and sea realm. Now that they had appeared, their fighting spirit soared. Within the spell formations, Elder Meng Jida of the Qinsang stood on the spell altar. He looked at them, exchanged a few words with his fellow Taoists, and then stepped forward. I know why you have come, he said. The heavens are rich with spiritual energy, and should belong to the virtuous. Fellow Taoists of the various sects and clans, and I would like to compete with you in terms of Taoist magic. The winner will stay, and the loser will leave. What do you all think? The Mirror Lake cultivators were a bit surprised. After communicating with each other, they realized that they actually had the advantage. The other side had given up on their home ground advantage. Furthermore, if it was settled in the form of a spell contract, then the mountain and sea realm cultivators would not be able to pull any tricks. Therefore, they quickly agreed. Ci Shu watched as the Taoists stepped forward to sign the contract, and couldn't help but smile, as if his plan had succeeded. In this way, regardless of who won or lost, he would have achieved his goal of provoking the two sides to fight, and would be able to account to the devil masters behind him. He took a step back, but his body slowly dissipated. In the end, he disappeared. However, the strange thing was that none of the people who came with him noticed his departure. It was as if he had never existed. However, the people of the mountain and sea realm did notice. Meng Jida could sense that the man's aura was strange, and immediately went on guard. Summoning his divine will, he communicated with the sun and moon lords for a moment, then said, "The divine lords said that this man's true body has not yet entered the realm. He is only an illusory projection, and has already vanished. There is no need to worry about him." Sun Ji-yen smiled and said, "Senior Marshal brother, the contract has been signed, who should go first?" Meng Zhida glanced outside and saw Shaoqing Sect's sword chi surging and leaping about, so he said, "Let our fellow Taoists from Shaoqing Sect choose their opponents first." After Gao Qingtu rejected Ran Guanyue, he naturally wouldn't give her any more instructions. He just told his subordinates to pay attention and not let her disturb him. As for Ran Guanyue, she went back and waited for a long time. Seeing that there was no reply from the sect Yen, she went to visit again. Several times, the door was shut in front of her, and she left angrily. The upper echelons of the sect Yen also knew about this matter. When they saw her leave, they thought that the matter was over. However, not long after, news spread throughout the myriad heavens and realms, saying that the sect Yen clearly had a way to solve this crisis of declining spiritual opportunity, but they refused to do so. Moreover, there were people who said that the reason why spiritual opportunity was declining was because the sect Yen was secretly promoting it. Because the power that benefited the most was undoubtedly the sect Yen. Moreover, the cultivation of the sect Yen did not require spiritual opportunity, which seemed to confirm this rumor. The news spread quickly, and it became more and more intense. Gao Qingtu's heart sank when he heard this, and he felt a great sense of danger coming at him. Now that the heavens and realms were embroiled in disputes, it was all because of the decline of spiritual vigor. Although many cultivators with profound cultivation experience would not believe in such things, but if they wanted to divert the internal disputes, perhaps they would push the boat along with the current. Although the sect Yen was strong and prosperous, it did not have the ability to fight against the myriad heavens and realms at the same time. If everyone pointed their spear at it, there was a risk of collapse. As the saying goes, it is difficult to offend the anger of the masses. If the sect Yen was no longer there, even if it could be proved that the sect Yen had nothing to do with the decline of spiritual opportunity, it would be useless. This matter should be because someone saw the expansion of the sect Yen and the gradual expansion of their power, so they used the matter of spiritual opportunity to pressure them. They wanted to delay their hands and feet, and even subvert the entire sect in one fell swoop. However, he did not know who the mastermind was. If he thought further, could the decline of spiritual opportunity be related to this matter? After pondering for a long time, Gao Qingtu summoned the elders of the sect to discuss countermeasures. When everyone heard this, they were also shocked. An elder suggested that if the sect Yen was forced and the situation was really critical, then they should close the realm gate and cut off the connection between the myriad heavens and realms. Then, they would not be afraid of everyone attacking the sect Yen together. However, Gao Qingtu did not agree to this suggestion. In the past, this realm gate was indeed blocking the path of the big sects because the small sects that were suppressed by it did not need to curry favor too much. They could go elsewhere and there were more routes of retreat. But now, it became the way out for the various sects to search for spiritual opportunity. It could not be easily closed. Duan Qing could not help but say, "Chief, I thought that the sect Yen did not need to be afraid. I obtained the primordial jade last time. Now, success or failure is still uncertain. Could it be that they would dare to bully us?" Gao Qingtu was slightly startled. After a brief calculation, he raised his head and said, "That's right. I was negligent here. The situation is not that serious yet." The primordial jade was obtained by the sect Yen. Even though this matter was hated by others, it was also a protective talisman. On the surface, behind the sect Yen was a cultivator who could break through the true Yang realm at any time. The higher the realm of the cultivator, the more they would not dare to risk their lives. Therefore, the number of enemies that he had to face would not be that many. He predicted that there would be people who would invade in the early stage. As long as he suppressed this group of people and formed a deterrent, it would not be difficult to deal with this crisis. The key was that he could not be flustered first. Otherwise, it would only give others an opportunity. After thinking, he said, "Pass down my order." Immediately invite all the high officials here. Tell them that I have something important to discuss with them. Zhang Yan was looking at the mysterious Dao technique that Kong displayed in the spirit will. However, at this moment, he could not help but think about the matter of accepting other people's Dao techniques. The great virtues were in charge of a part of the great Dao. Logically speaking, although there was only one Dao technique, if your cultivation was high enough, you could turn one into 10,000 and 10,000 into one. If a person could make his own Dao technique surpass all other Dao techniques, then he would be able to accept other Dao techniques. However, with his current cultivation, it was impossible unless his understanding of this Dao technique could surpass Kong's. Then, the Dao technique would naturally belong to him without him needing to take it. However, the spirit of creation was different. As long as it devoured the great virtues, it would naturally be able to take over the authority of the Dao technique. However, when he thought of this, his heart suddenly moved. Suddenly, a guess appeared in his mind. After thinking about it carefully, he could not help but nod his head. However, this guess was not of much help to the current situation. He could verify it in the future. After looking at all the Dao techniques, he retracted his gaze and signaled to Kong that he could retract his Dao technique. Kong retracted his Dao technique and said, "Do you have any other questions?" Zhang Yan said, "I have a slight understanding of your Dao technique. If there is a Dao friend who disperses his Weili and is on the verge of death, then I can try to see if there is a spirit of creation within the Weili." He did not possess this Dao technique. Naturally, he could not use it. However, after looking at it once, he could also see what Kong could see. In the past, Kong was the only one who could see the clues. Naturally, it was difficult to convince the others. However, now that there were two people who could identify it at the same time, it was much more convincing. Most importantly, he was here. His magic power could suppress everyone except himself. If Kong wanted to deal with someone, there was no need for him to use such a method. Kong said, "I have already discussed with Dao friend Xiang Ming. He is willing to come here and try first. If there is no problem, then we will look for other Dao friends. What do you think?" Zhang Yan knew that Kong still had some concerns. He wanted to call them one by one to verify. This way, it would be difficult for everyone to connect. If there was a problem, he could easily suppress them. However, he felt that there was no need to do so. If he secretly verified them one by one, it would only increase the suspicion of others. Thus, he said, "There is no need to hide this." Kong understood the meaning behind his words and said, "I will listen to your instructions." Zhang Yan immediately retracted his divine will and came out from Busu Tian. With a thought, he came to the world that everyone created. When Feng Du and the others saw him, they came to welcome him. After both parties greeted each other, Xiang Ju asked, "Dao friend, do you have any instructions for coming here personally?" Zhang Yan said, "This time, I was invited by Dao friend Kong to verify if any one of us is being used by the creation spirit." He roughly explained the situation and everyone immediately understood what he meant. At the same time, they were secretly shocked by Kong's boldness. He actually dared to show his Dao to others. However, they immediately realized that there was a loophole here that could not be considered as an oversight. Wei Ming said, "Dao friend Xiang Ju, after trying like this, there is still one person that cannot be verified." Xiang Ju smiled deeply and said, "If all of us are not the creation spirit, then the last one is." Wei Ming pondered for a while and said, "We can't make a conclusion from this. Forget it, let's see the results first. Moreover, if there is a problem with Dao friend Xianyuan, we would not have survived until now." Xiang Ju smiled again and did not continue the conversation. At this moment, Kong stood up and said, "Since it is using my Dao, I am willing to be verified first." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. Seeing that he agreed, Kong bowed and released his Weili. In an instant, his body dispersed and turned into countless Weili that scattered in the void. Zhang Yan cast his gaze over. From the purple-robed Taoist's actions, he could tell that if the Taoist was connected to the mighty power of the spirit of creation, then in the current situation, an external force should have intervened. Chapter 2282. Back in the myriad heavens, the people of the Green Jade Palace had been paying close attention to the invasion of the mountain and sea realm by the remnants of the Mirror Lake realm. However, the two sides were currently at war, and all of the realm gates leading to the mountain and sea realm had been sealed, making it impossible for outsiders to see what was going on inside. They could only rely on the Heavenspan Gui to send word back. After Elder Peng finished reading the letter, he passed it to Feng Lan and said, "Please take a look, elders." After Feng Lan took it and looked at it, he showed an expression as if he had known this would happen. He then passed it to Guan Longzhao. After the latter finished looking, he said, "Although it's expected, these foreign cultivators do have some skills." The foreign Taoist cultivators had fought the Shaoqing sect as soon as they arrived, and a few of them had been killed. Later, they realized how powerful they were, and decided to focus on staying alive. They really did have some skill. Furthermore, they had quite a few good items, which allowed them to avoid certain death. Many of them had been defeated, but not killed. Furthermore, it seemed that the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm had no intention of killing them all. Feng Lan sighed. They're a potential disaster. Why didn't the fellow Taoists of the mountain and sea realm kill them all? Guan Longzhao thought about it for a moment, then said, when they invaded, they had many powerful treasures. Perhaps the fellow Taoists of the mountain and sea realm were afraid of them. Elder Peng thought about it for a moment, then said, that couldn't be the case. Otherwise, the mountain and sea realm wouldn't have opened the gate for them to enter. Perhaps the sects of the mountain and sea realm were deliberately keeping them alive, although he couldn't tell what their intentions were. After this battle, he said, quite a few of them were killed. The rest are no longer a concern. As long as they don't come to the myriad heavens, they have nothing to do with us. Guan Longzhao and Feng Lan nodded. Over the next few decades, the Green Jade Palace continued to receive reports from the Heavenspan Gui. When mortal cultivators fought, they would have to calculate each other's strength. Unless there was a large gap between the two sides, the battles would usually last for a long time. Therefore, they wouldn't be surprised if the battles lasted for more than 100 years. However, by now, they could tell that the foreign cultivators had been defeated by their fellow Taoists. None of them had won a single battle, and the most they could do was draw. Therefore, they had lost their morale, and weren't far from ending the battle. At this moment, Feng Lan suddenly sensed something. He glanced to the side and his spirits lifted as he said, "Elder Peng, this person has escaped." Elder Peng looked over and saw about 5 or 6 people escaping. With this level of strength, they could dominate anywhere in the myriad heavens. However, it was clear that they were powerless against Yu Huan and the myriad heavens. However, his mood did not relax much. If the spiritium continued to decline, then the sects of the Yu Huan all heavens would not be able to hold on. They would definitely attack the places that were still flourishing. When that happened, even the Green Jade Palace would not be able to restrain them. The situation that had lasted for millions of years in the Yu Huan all heavens might very well collapse. However, in this world, how many things could truly live forever? Even a Taoist cultivator like him, who had severed his future self, would also decay without Ziqing's spiritual vigor. He sighed in his heart. If a Taoist cultivator could not transcend, he would eventually be slaughtered by heaven and earth. He did not know when a great calamity would befall him. His countless years of hard work would most likely be destroyed in a day. In the silence, all the Vedanta were watching the changes in front of them. However, they were different from Zhang Yan. Even if the spirit of creation Weili was really involved, they could not see it. They could only wait here for the result. Wei Ming said, "If this method works, will the spirit of creation avoid me in advance if it knows that I'm spying on it?" Ji Zhuang said, "It won't. The spirit of creation's main body has not fallen into the myriad heavens. The big picture may respond, but the small details will not change. If the spirit of creation's main body knew about the situation here, then they would definitely not be able to test it out. However, its main body was still surrounded by the tribulation power. It could not directly make the correct judgment about what was happening in the silence. Only the spirit of creation Weili would respond spontaneously. Therefore, using this method, there was a certain chance of finding the body that was being borrowed. Xiang Ju also said, right now, unless someone can communicate with the spirit of creation's main body like the purple-robed Taoist, then, Heng Wu said, we can't rule out this possibility. Fortunately, the tribulation power is there. Even if the spirit of creation's main body knows about this, it can't immediately interfere. Xiang Ju smiled and said intentionally or unintentionally, there's no way to be sure about this. After saying that, he looked at the scene again. There's still no result. If this continues, fellow Taoist Ing Kong will be driven into eternal silence. After Ing Kong spread out his Weili, he took the initiative to cut off all the connections with the myriad heavens. If he did not take the initiative to restrain himself and return to the myriad heavens, then it would be no different from entering eternal silence. Zhang Yan also saw this situation, but he did not say anything. At this moment, he was in charge of the overall situation. Before he spoke, Ing Kong could not stop. After a while, he said, fellow Taoist Ing Kong, it's done. As soon as he said that, Ing Kong's consciousness lit up again like a star. The scattered Weili overlapped and stepped out from the near-nothingness. He looked at Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan looked at him and said, I don't see anything strange on your body. Ing Kong nodded his head, cupped his fists, and silently retreated. Xiang Ming raised his head and stood up. He said, since fellow Taoist Ing Kong has tried, let me try. Zhang Yan said, all right. Seeing that he agreed, Xiang Ming also spread out his Weili. This time, not only was Zhang Yan looking at him, but Ing Kong was also looking at him. But in the end, he did not find anything strange on Ing Kong's body. Zhang Yan said calmly, I don't see anything strange on fellow Taoist Xiang Ming's body. Is there anyone else who wants to try? Although he said it politely, everyone present knew that everyone wanted to try in order to clear their suspicions. Seeing this, Wei Ming stood up and said, I was the first to return. Everyone, let me try. He cupped his hands together and released his mighty power, just like what Ing Kong and Xiang Ming did previously. Zhang Yan looked at him for a long time and looked at Ing Kong. The latter shook his head and also did not find anything strange on Ing Kong's body. Following that, Feng Du, Heng Wu, and Ji Zhuang also came up to give it a try. Similarly, they didn't find any entanglement with the mighty force of the spirit of creation. Among the returning Vedanta, only Xiang Ju hadn't proved it yet. Everyone's eyes focused on him. Xiang Ju smiled and said, it's my turn to try. He walked to the center and looked around. Then, he slowly spread out his Weili. Ing Kong stared at him. He felt that there was something wrong with Xiang Ju, but the others didn't find anything after investigating him. He wondered if the creation spirit method would fall on Xiang Ju. Zhang Yan looked at Xiang Ju for a long time before he said, I didn't see the creation spirit Weili on fellow Taoist Xiang Ju. Ing Kong frowned and shook his head, I didn't find anything either. Zhang Yan said, fellow Taoist Xiang Ju, you should restrain your Weili. The mighty force scattered in the void retracted, and mutual perception appeared from nothingness. He smiled and said, it seems like there isn't a creation spirit among us. Everyone lowered their eyes. In fact, only Zhang Yan hadn't seen it. However, no one dared to say it out loud. They only communicated with each other secretly. Wei Ming said, if fellow Taoist Xianyuan is the creation spirit method, I'm afraid we can't verify it. Xiang Ju smiled and said, it's good that we know about this. Hongdu sneered and said, if fellow Taoist Xianyuan is the creation spirit method, why would he need to spend so much effort to verify it? Wouldn't he just make himself more suspicious? Xiang Ju said, it's not that we're doubting fellow Taoist Xianyuan. It's just that the creation spirit method doesn't know it's him, maybe, Hongdu said disdainfully, even if fellow Taoist Xianyuan is willing to spread out his mana and only Ing Kong can see it, how can we verify it? Could it be that you want Ing Kong to show you his Dao technique? Even if Kong agrees, it's not that I'm looking down on you. You won't be able to see anything with your mana. Wei Ming said, if that's the case, with fellow Daoist Fengdu's mana, you should be able to verify it. Hongdu sneered and said, why would I do that? Fellow Daoist Xuanyuan's mana is the highest, so what he said is naturally correct. That's why I don't doubt him at all. Everyone was speechless. If Hongdu was willing to stand up for them, they might be able to cooperate. However, now that Hongdu was completely on Zhang Yan's side, there was no hope. Zhang Yan's expression was calm. He knew what everyone was thinking, but he couldn't let them verify it. He had both qi and strength, so he could verify it himself. Moreover, all of this could be deduced from the broken jade, there was no need to show it in front of others. There was no need to say these things out loud. He could suppress everyone with his strength, so he wasn't afraid of being suspected. Kong thought for a while and stood out, although we haven't found the body of the spirit of creation, it doesn't mean that there isn't one. Maybe it's hidden even deeper. Fellow Daoist Xianyuan told me before that with my Dao, I might not be able to find it in the end. Fellow Daoists, please be careful. Zhang Yan thought that there was still a flaw in the inspection just now. This was because even though every Vedanta had dispersed their Weili, they were instinctively maintaining themselves so that they wouldn't fall into eternal silence. Even if he didn't say anything, when it came to the crucial moment, very few people would fall into a dead end. Maybe Kong was an exception. However, he couldn't use his mana to forcefully suppress Kong, because at that time, if he wasn't careful, he would really fall into eternal silence. If he found the body of the spirit of creation, it would be fine, but if he didn't find it, it would be a waste of his strength. He did this to try Kong's method, not to ask for a result. Since he couldn't find it, there was no need for him to delve deeper. He said calmly, since we can't find it, then this matter ends here. There are 2 other Daoist friends who will be back soon. When that time comes, we still need to be careful of the spirit of creation. I hope that everyone will be careful. When he finished, he waved his sleeves and returned to Bu Su Tian.